Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Keeping You Company, a podcast where Rikamani and I just ramble on about things which we find interesting. And this podcast is here to keep you company, whether you're doing chores, doing some work, you need something on in the background, or if you are generally having a bit of a rough time and you want two friendly voices. I was about to say friendly faces, but that doesn't work at all, does it? Because even if you're listening, no, if you're listening to this as a podcast, that doesn't work, and even if you're watching the screen, our faces aren't there, so that makes no sense at all. Friendly voices, there we go, friendly voices, to keep you company. Then that's what we're here for. Of course, Rook is here. Hello, Rook.
Hello, Scott Sword. Happy to be the other friendly voice in your ears.
Hey, there you go. It's been a long time since we've spoken. How long's it been?
Has it?
Has
I
it?
guess it's been all of 2 hours.
Yeah, we did a Fear Dracula live stream, so a lot of the catching up we kind of did outside of the podcast recording. Um, we did a little
Yep,
live stream
that's
for
true.
Fear of Dracula.
It was a good match. This is, because this episode's going to come out on a delayed release. This was the first quarterfinals match. I don't know. I was going to say the whole thing might be over by the time it comes out, but that's probably not true. But it'll be coming to an end.
Yeah, it'll be pretty close. I reckon it'll be maybe towards the end of the. Oh, maybe not actually. It might. Yeah, we just inside probably the transition between the semi-finals and the finals. I guess it depends when this comes out. We're assuming it's going to
Hmm.
come out at the beginning of December, but there's a good chance if we can get another recording session, just depending on how things are going to work, we this might be a mid-November episode.
Might be. Yeah, if we can make that work. We've been trying to increase production with mixed mixed results.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, to be fair, time has really flown by since I returned
Oh
in
yeah.
September. So yeah, it's a short period of time between September and Christmas, really. Um, we'll
Hmm.
probably make a better go of it post Christmas, but that's okay. So yeah, we've done a lot of catching up off that. So yeah, for people who don't know, then yeah, it's just we've got our Fear of Dracula World Championship quotes. We call it the League of Dracula, and yeah, for the first time ever, we've got a league and knockout format. So the knockouts are kind of now they've gone through the first round. They're in the quarterfinals now. So exciting stuff. So we'll see.
It's very exciting. So far, it's been upsets all around.
Yeah, all the higher seeds got knocked out in the first round. And we almost had an upset tonight. Not quite though. Highest seed
Almost. No,
just got the
almost.
win. Almost. Yeah.
But if it goes to a game three, anything could still happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have to see what happens in the rematch. Of course, by the time, depending on when the people listen to this, if it's mid-November or beginning of December, will I still be in the tournament? I might have
Who
got knocked
knows?
out.
If there's too many upsets, yeah, you might not be anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I might be one of the highest seeds. I'll get knocked out. At least I'll be able to enjoy it from afar without thinking about the pressure of playing games. But you never know.
Mm,
Well, I'll be
you never
interested to
know.
see next time we do this podcast. Will I still be in the tournament?
Who
Ooh,
knows?
we'll have to see. We've got we had the last two episodes, which were cultural quizzes, but we had a little bit of follow up too with driving lessons and stuff. But today we're gonna go on to a different topic. We're going back to Japan. For those of you,
Yay.
hey, you're gonna be hyped for that, obviously.
Hmm.
Is there any follow up stuff we have to do before we get into this?
Uh, I think a lot of the stuff. So if you're interested in specific follow up about certain things that happened in last episode, that like because I'm not thinking of any like comments that I think we immediately need to respond to. But if you are interested about something we said in the episode that you felt like didn't get followed up on, you might want to check the comments on the YouTube video. I know that I do this for like every episode. I listen back and anything in the episode where I was kind of like, I don't know about that, or I think it's this, but I could be wrong. Like I'll come in and I'll leave a comment with a timestamp to the approximate time that I was having that thought out loud and not being clear on something, and then try to clarify it in comment form. So I did leave one of those comments on the previous quiz episode, and you can see that and some of the replies. Because, for instance, Scott Sword was thinking of the name of a famous mountain in the U.S., which was
Mm-hmm.
actually a volcano, and he thought it was Helena. And so I looked up. There's a Mount Helena in Montana, I think it was, and I was like, oh well, there's a Mount Helena, and I put that in my little follow up to be like, here's the answer to that thing Scott Sword may have been thinking of. And then
Mm-hmm.
Snuffleupagus responded to that and was like, oh, I think it's much more likely Scott Sword is thinking of the much more famous volcano, Mount St. Helens. That
Yeah, looks.
famously erupted. Yeah,
Mm-hmm. So
it's
yeah,
like
that
that's
that
that's a lot more likely. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say yeah. So, but the two of you were doing a really good job on the previous podcast, especially so Snuff also contributed to the quiz as well. So there's a lot of activity in the comments with the two of you talking about various things. And Snuff did send some messages through to me analyzing my performance. Um,
Ooh.
so
How are those?
oh, he was sort of,
What did he make of you?
oh, he was very positive about it all.
That's good.
I am very gutted about that national park question, just especially because of the state. Because I must admit I had Mount Rushmore in my brain because I was like, there's gonna be a Mount. They're gonna
Ah.
ask me who are the four presidents in Mount Rushmore, and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
research it. But I spent the whole day thinking, well, who are the four presidents? Who are the four presidents? And then which state is it? Is it North Dakota, South Dakota? It's one of the Dakotas. Which one is it? Which one is it? And then as soon as you asked me about national parks, I was just like, boom, got it. Nope. I did
Yep.
not have it. That's okay. All in all, I
Yeah.
can't
Snuff
complain too
apparently
much.
called what you were probably thinking of there as well. Yeah. Yeah, your
Which is,
overall performance was good. And then it's just like the bats, right? In Fury of Dracula. That's the one that you were really anticipating, and I never asked you about it.
yeah, yeah,
No
yeah.
Mount Rushmore question.
I don't know if I would have got all four. I might have got three, but there's probably one I would have just forgotten, right? So,
My friend, I don't think I would get all four. I'm so I really don't know a huge amount about of my own country's culture. It's
no.
kind of odd how that works. It's like, I live here. Why do I need to know all this stuff, right?
um, I'm waiting for it to become one of the states in American Truck Simulator, so we can actually go and visit Mount
Ah.
Rushmore. But the thing is, Wyoming is one of the states. So, what was it? Old Faithful. I should be
Mm-hmm.
able to visit. So, what I really should have done as a follow up was to have me going around American Truck Simulator and driving to Old Faithful. Um, so
Ah, yeah, that would be fun.
if I can if I can get OBS and ATS to kind of like each other again, and my
Mm.
computer to be able to function and not lag, then I maybe one of the next episodes like we can do a trip around. Uh, which one was it? There's Yellowstone National Park and Yosemite National Park,
Mm-hmm.
right? Those are the two.
Right, those were the two. Yep.
Right. So yeah, I'm gonna have to. We're gonna have to maybe do a trip from one to the other. That might have to be a thing we have to do.
Oh, that'd be fun. Set the record straight on air.
And what was the other one? Truth and Consequences. Is that on a west? Is it a
Yeah,
Western state?
truth or consequences.
Oh, sorry, Truth or Consequences. What state was that again?
I completely forgot.
Oh
See,
no,
this is what I'm telling you about.
because you would have said it as all and all, right?
Oh yeah, when I was doing the quiz, I had the answer in front of me.
Oh, I've
I
searched
read
for
off a card.
New Mexico.
There it is. Yeah, I just got it myself.
Right. Well, maybe we're gonna have to. I'm gonna have to do a trip, like the trifactor, right? Go around those three locations.
Yep. Yeah, that could be fun. Heck, I'd learn something. I'm
uh,
expecting to learn things today. Because this our sort of main topic. We don't have to get like I'm not necessarily rushing you, but our main topic today is going to concern Japanese culture. Which, if people don't know, if they haven't listened to the past episodes, I'm a professional translator. I translate from Japanese to English, and I lived in Japan for 5 years. I've walked the length and width of the country, and I've studied a lot in school. There's a lot I know about Japan, but there's also a lot I don't know about Japan, right? There's only so much one person can ever know about something.
sure.
So I'm curious to see. We're going to talk today about some things that Scott Swords found in a book written by another YouTuber abroad in Japan. And we're going to talk about some cultural observations that Scott Sword found striking and that I might or might not be able to shed light on, or that I will be educated on myself because, again, I don't know everything. So this will be an interesting potential learning opportunity for me as well.
And also to differentiate between your experience in Japan and abroad in Japan. I'll say his name properly later, but abroad in Japan's experience in Japan, and obviously then you're there under slightly different timings as well. So maybe there's slight societal shifts over the period of time that you were there and the period of
True.
time that abroad in Japan. Well, abroad in Japan is still based in Japan.
Right. That's the other thing is that culture doesn't stand still, right? It's constantly changing and shifting in subtle and less subtle ways. So you can,
Absolutely.
like, my knowledge of Japan is best crystallized around a time 10 years ago, right? So,
Mm-hmm. and you got that in your head. That's the Japanese culture, right? Because
Right.
you experienced it and you lived it. But well, we'll see. We'll go through some things. So yeah, just very quick before we get into that, the footage that you're seeing is not of Japan. That would have been very nice, but what it actually is footage from Miniature Wunderland, which I talked about in a previous podcast. In case you didn't hear that podcast, that basically it's a beautiful place in Hamburg. If you go to Hamburg, go to Miniature Wunderland. It's well worth it. It's basically a model. I was gonna say it's a model railway land, but that's a little bit disingenuous. It is focused on model railways, but it's more than that. They've created almost like a replica Hamburg there. They're going through lots of different regions, so the first regions they built were Switzerland, Austria, and Germany, but now they've transitioned to do some of the Americas and Italy and more stuff that I don't remember, which is terrible. But it's also expanded so much. I went there in 2000 and get the year right, 2015. And then I returned there only a few months ago in the summer of 2024. And in those 7 years, it's expanded so much. And now they're starting to occupy a second building now, just because it's so vast, everything they're building. And there's like a footbridge that goes between the two buildings, and you're going over one of the little sort of canals that go through the city. So it's a wonderful place. Do go. You could. I mean, I spent about just over 4 hours there this time around. I could have spent 4 hours more. Seriously.
That
Um,
sounds amazing.
if we were with another couple, so we had to leave and go off and do other stuff. But if it was just myself and my wife, I would have told her around lunchtime, right? You just go off and do something. I'm here. I'm safe.
Nice.
I'll come and find you when I'm done. Um,
Nice.
there's so much to see. And I mean, I'm not joking. There's so many like little Easter eggs everywhere. I probably said in the previous podcast. So when you go, you get a leaflet with the map, but then they've got a page of just random stuff, and it's good for the kids and things that go there because the
Hmm.
kids. I mean, they'd love it anyway. I can't imagine any kid going and not liking it. But even then,
Hmm.
you've got all these cool little nuggets of like the one of the examples I gave was spoilers. I don't know how you could spoil this film, but the flying bicycle scene from E.T.
Ah,
Um,
yes.
they've replicated that in one of the sets. So as soon as you see it in the leaflet, you just spend the entire time trying to find E.T. um, There was also a scene, like a sheriff scene, so the cartoon character Lucky Luke was there, and the Ghostbusters van, and all this sort of stuff, right? So mixed in with this really serious model making. This is not. I don't want to. I mean, people can see if they're watching this, not as a podcast form, but if you're watching the video, the the level of detail is exquisite, absolutely incredible. And it's a real labor of love for the people who work there. But at the same time, they have a really clever sense of humor, and they put in all these additional little extra bits of information and nuggets for you to look for. So there's always, you can go back probably 10 times and still see new stuff. Um, they have a
I'm
day in.
excited just to see the video footage.
Oh, it's incredible. I love it so much. I honestly, if you gave me tickets just to fly to Hamburg right now and go back, I'd go back in a heartbeat. Like no questions asked at all. They have a day
Awesome.
and night cycle. They have a functioning airport as well, and the planes all automated by computer. And they go around and taxi and take off and land. Um, Unfortunately,
Oh,
when we
this
were
is
there, I probably said this in a previous podcast, the immersion was broken when maybe something happened, one of the planes got stuck, or the code broke, or whatever. And I was trying to film one of the takeoff, and I felt this tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and one of the workers was there, and he was saying, "Excuse me," and I was thinking, "Oh no, he's not happy that I'm filming." No, he didn't. He just got past me, took his shoes off, and started walking up all over the airport. He just screaming,
yeah.
"You're breaking the immersion!"
Yeah, I remember that was the story of yours that I remembered from the last time we talked about this. I was like, "Oh, right. The miniature place where the guy walked onto the exhibit."
Yeah. And they have this, and you can actually see it working. You can walk past it. You can see their computer room, and it's like one of those things. You know when you see the traffic control centers, right? For
Right.
the highway,
Yeah.
it's like that. A bank
Yeah.
of I don't know, 30 massive screens, and all these people sitting
Hmm.
there with computers with all the power to check anything and move trains around and stuff. It's awesome.
That's
um,
incredible.
So that's what that is. I do apologize that some of the footage is a bit shaky. I do not have a tripod, so that makes it. And I must admit, it is it did at this point get a bit tiring me having to hold up the phone and try to record footage. And also, it was pretty crowded in there. So yeah, trying to do it in a way that I wasn't going to get bumped and make sure that random people's faces didn't get in the shot and stuff. I have recorded other footage where you see people in the background, but I didn't want close-ups of people's faces.
Yeah.
Um, so especially when there were lots of kids and stuff running around, right? So most focus purely on the trains and the landscapes and stuff. Mostly trains because trains are fun when you just watch them, go past, and that's all fun and games. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's what that is. It's already halfway through the first loop, so we should probably get into the topic.
Might
um,
help.
we might have to split this into two podcasts. We'll see how the conversation goes.
We'll
But
see.
basically, yeah, this kind of started. I was back in Scotland over the summer, and I went into a bookshop, and I kind of told myself, I'm going to buy books. I'm going to read books. And I happened to see a book called Abroad in Japan. This beautiful, cartoon Japanese sort of landscape behind it and everything. And because obviously I'd been talking to you for the couple of months before going back to Scotland, and
Hmm.
we had conversations on the podcast and stuff about Japan. I was like, oh, perfect. This is topical. I didn't even think about doing it for the podcast. It was more just like, oh, this is going to be interesting to read. Not realizing that when I bought the book, we both actually somewhat knew, who the guy was that we're talking about, who the person who wrote the book. So the book's called Abroad in Japan, same as the YouTube channel, but the person is called Chris Broad, which is kind of a clever name for
Mm.
his YouTube
Yeah,
channel.
that's a good
Um,
pun.
Very good. Yeah, I appreciated that when he said it. I was like, oh yeah, that is very clever. Um, See, we'd seen. I think maybe did you show me his YouTube channel first? How did we discover it?
I
Because I know
don't
there's a
think
very particular
so.
story that you really liked because of this guy.
Yeah, well, it's the only thing of his that I've really seen. Like I think I clicked a couple of other YouTube videos, but I think we were talking about like taboos in Japan on just back and forth on Discord. And you brought up how you knew about some of them because of this guy abroad in Japan. And you linked to one of his videos where he was talking about things that were like instances where he made mistakes because apparently he's talked in the past about like all these faux pas and like do's and don'ts when you're living in Japan, and generally his own stories don't feature, and he was like, well, I want to set the record straight. I want to talk about three things that are like the biggest mistakes I made when I was living in Japan. And the first of his stories in particular, I just found absolutely hilarious because I can picture the scene. I knew the heart of what every mistake was going to be as he was describing each one of these things where there were like cultural faux pas, and I was like, oh, so I saw this one coming. But at the same time, his delivery of the story was just delicious. It was hilarious. And to this day, like to be fair, like part of this is also my own invention because I've made up my own little translation of how this exchange that I'm thinking of would go if I were to translate it out of Japanese,
Mm-hmm.
and that in and of itself sort of tickles me. So that has like kept it alive. But I just love the story about how he was stopped at a gate, like entry to a highway in Japan, and he didn't understand. He didn't have quite the right level of Japanese to realize what the official who was helping him out was asking him about, and just obliviously drove and then got ended up getting on the highway for free as a mistake. That story I just found incredibly funny.
It's
So
also
for I guess for the benefit of the viewers, because I feel like this is sort of a weird tease situation where I'm saying, "Oh, it's so funny," and then not sharing the joke. I feel like I should just very briefly be like, the heart of the mistake was there's a word in Japanese which if you're first learning Japanese, it's going to be prominent. It's genki. Genki, it kind of means energetic, but it can also be used to mean like healthy. So genki desu ka. The des is sort of a way that you form a sentence, and then a ka is like a verbal question mark. So the question genki desu ka um, is one of the sort of beginner Japanese friendly ways of saying, "Hey, are you okay? How are you doing?" Right? There's
okay.
another word in Japanese that sounds very similar. It is genkin, And that final which I'm sort of emphasizing, genkin, right,
Uh-huh.
is the differentiator. That means cash. So the guy who's operating the arm to get onto the highway for cars comes up to this guy because he's accidentally driven into the credit card lane instead of the cash lane,
Mm-hmm.
and he says, "Oh, would you like to? Are you paying with cash?" And the way that he phrases that uses the word genkin desu ka, except Chris Broad heard genki desu ka, are you okay? And so his response, my own sort of mental translation of what that response would be like, oh, are you paying with cash? Response, feeling fine, my friend. And then he just drives onto the highway
Uh,
because he thought the guy was asking him if he was okay. He was like,
mhm.
yep, 100%. And drives onto the highway.
It's
When
like,
really he was just being asked if he was paying with cash, and he was supposed to, like, the guy was like pointing over to the cash lane.
it's not that moment. Chris must have thought that it wasn't. You didn't have to pay to get through the toll booth. It was like some sort of like mental health like checkup.
It was like a courtesy. No, like he thought the guy was just being nice. He was like, "Oh, you've made a mistake. I'm concerned about your welfare, right? Are you okay, right?" "Oh yeah, I'm fine, thanks." And then drives onto the highway.
Lets him drive
And he
off.
didn't
Yeah.
even realize. He didn't even realize till he was studying more advanced vocabulary in Japanese. He was like, "Oh, here's this new word, genkin. Uh-oh." The way he tells the story, his like realization was really funny.
Because I could remember if he said it in the video, which makes sense you say in the video, but that story features in the book, and I had like this second, um, sort of second time through experiencing that story by reading it in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fantastic, and just the way he wrote it, and obviously he could express it slightly more, but still, like and yeah, just that realization afterwards when the penny dropped in terms of
Mm-hmm.
what had actually been said, and then he was almost going around almost like this somewhat paranoid state that you'd suddenly get caught by this toll booth guy, like months
Yeah.
down the line because he didn't pay. I can't even imagine the conversation like afterwards between all the other, like all the toll booth, like assistants and operators. uh,
Yeah. Oh, these crazy foreigners, right? So
uh,
that video with the like three mistakes that Chris Broad made in his own experience, the three big ones anyway,
mhm,
with his experience living in Japan, that was my only real exposure to him. And then you
right.
told me that you'd bought his book over the summer. Well, not his book. You told me you bought the book Abroad in Japan over the summer, and I was like, oh, that's the same name as that YouTube channel with that funny video. And you were like, wait, is it
Uh,
the same guy?
Right. No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Yeah, I discovered the channel first, but then you were the one who actually remembered that the channel was called that. I didn't connect the
Mm-hmm.
two when I saw the book. So it's not as if I say, it's not as if I bought the book going, oh, look, here's a YouTuber writing about Japan. That's fun. I'll read that. I just thought it'd be, because it was, I don't even know if the synopsis even says anything about YouTube. Maybe it does, but
Hmm.
it would have said first about being a teacher. And obviously, Jet Program, we've talked about that a
Mm-hmm.
lot. Um, I thought it'd be a really cool thing just to read through. And obviously, then now we can discuss it on the podcast. I don't have it here with me. That would have been clever. I When I came back over after the summer, just because of various things with flights, I was able to take quite a few books with me, and I had to make quite a critical decision. How many books do I take over with me? How
Mm-hmm.
many new books? I did buy quite a few new books over the summer. How many new books do I take? How many books I had started reading but hadn't finished do I take with me? Do I
Mm-hmm.
take Abroad in Japan with me when realistically I probably won't read it again unless it gets discussed on the podcast? So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't take it with me, and the pile of 10 books or 11 books, 10 books, 11 books that I brought over with me is still behind me on my desk, and I haven't really touched many of them. And there was a really bad moment this morning when I was about to log in because I do my Spanish classes online, and my teacher was having internet problems. So there was a moment where I was staring at my sort of reflection through the camera on Google Meet, waiting for the
Mm-hmm.
meeting to start. And I caught, because the camera was just wide enough, I could see behind, sort of over my shoulder, in the sort of the reflection on the screen, all these books behind me I haven't read, I haven't touched. Even though I said I came back saying I'm going to read, I'm going to read. I felt very ashamed of myself. My
The
excuse,
looming pile of books, dun
yeah, I
dun dun dun
know.
dun dun, just in the back corner of the screen.
It's very scary stuff. It's probably good if I don't have my webcam on. Um, but in my defense at the moment, I'm not going to read any because I've got a Spanish exam in 2 weeks as of the time of recording.
Hmm.
So, somewhat priority is probably read Spanish stuff. All the books are in English. But I bought some magazines recently on music and trains, funny enough, and that I can read in Spanish just to keep that going before the exam. I'm doing other stuff for the exam too, by the way. I'm not just reading magazines and hoping I'll pass. I am actually doing proper like practice exams and things. But yeah,
Nice.
that's the plan. But maybe might have to be a Christmas thing. Oh, we'll see. Yeah, I always want to sit down and read. I brought Bill Bryson's sort of tour around the UK book. Um,
Oh yeah, you mentioned you started that one.
yeah, and I put it on the lounge table last weekend, and I said to myself, right, I'm going to watch a couple of episodes of a series, and then I'm just going to sit here and relax. I'm going to read my book, and then nope, I got interrupted by various things. So
Uh,
didn't happen. But anyway, so yeah, so I bought
yep.
this book, and it was a very interesting experience reading it for a couple of things. Firstly, because there were so many instances when I was reading the book that it felt like I was just reliving our podcast experience in a good way. I mean that in a positive, by the way. Um,
Okay, good.
I was reading it, and Rook's told me all this, and in a good way. It's nice to hear that sort of validation from another person who had gone there to have some experiences and to be reliving that. There were things that, because we've talked about so much stuff, even though
Hmm.
we've only done a few episodes together, we talked about so much stuff and trying to keep all that in your head. So it was really nice being able to sort of relive
Hmm.
those conversations with you again and certain things that I'd forgot. Oh yeah, Rook talked about that. Yeah, that's right. Um, so that was one side of the equation. The other half of the equation was when Chris started talking about very specific, crazy experiences and interesting cultural tidbits about Japan and whatever. And I was scratching my head, going, "Rook didn't tell me anything about this, and
Uh,
this is all stuff we should have been discussing." So cue my phone with the notes app, and I was writing everything into
wow.
into the phone. So that's what this podcast is going to be today. We're going to go through some of that stuff,
Yeah,
albeit
and
I will.
this is why I think it might be a learning experience for me because it might genuinely be that this stuff is outside of what I know.
Mm-hmm, we'll have to see, and you can
Hmm.
confirm or deny and evaluate and all that stuff. Albeit, I'm going to say that with a caveat being, I read the book in late July and it's now beginning of November, so my memory is a touch hazy. I have
Right.
gone through the notes; they're a little bit cryptic, so I had to try and tease them out a bit. And I've researched stuff like, oh yeah, now I remember, but I might not remember a lot of contextual information. Some things, yes, if it was very memorable. But other things, if they were just very random sort of comments I wrote, if you ask me, oh, what was the exact situation? I might not know the answer.
Yeah. 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 I
So,
understand. That's part of why I wanted to do this episode. I think we maybe caught a little bit of this in the end of the last one where I was saying we got to do this episode before you forget everything.
so try about it. We'll see. We'll see how much we cover, and it just depends how the conversation goes. The other thing about the book, just in case, I mean, spoilers. If anybody wants to read it, I haven't seen it as a thing. I haven't watched a lot of Chris's YouTube channel. I haven't seen Abroad in Japan much, so there's probably other
Yeah.
stories he's
Neither have
talked
I.
about which I haven't seen in there, apart from the one that I found about the toll booth story and everything. But the book took quite a dramatic sort of turn midway through.
Oh.
When you read the book, you know from the synopsis or the blurb and everything that Chris spent 10 years, has spent because he hasn't left yet. He's still there. As far as I'm aware, has spent 10 years, over 10 years in Japan. So his book which was published last year, is based upon the
Hmm.
10 years he'd been living in Japan. Um, Now, maybe it's just I'm not saying this is wrong, and I'm not a writer, so I'm not in any way criticizing the way Chris did it. But it's just something to be aware that when you buy the book, um, there are so many things that he talks about his initial, let's say, year to 18 months.
Hmm.
And then the minute you get sort of past that sort of 18-month, 2 year mark, the next 8 years just gets accelerated really quickly.
Ah, okay.
Maybe I'm getting just don't quote me on terms of the timing. It might be slightly different to that, but it's not
Hmm.
as if the 10 years is nicely spread out throughout the whole book.
Right.
There is quite a chunk at the beginning that is very much, I don't want to say a day by day account of his
Hmm.
first few months in Japan because that's ridiculous, but you gain the point. There's a lot of things that happen within the first 18 months, which somewhat makes sense because.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. That's the way the human brain works, right? You've got a lot of new information to process, and
Mhm,
you've got a lot of memorable experiences in that initial adjustment period, and then
yeah,
you hit the new normal.
yes, yeah, yeah. So that's the only thing. So if you ever do buy the book, either Rook or anybody who's watching, just be aware that it's not this nice continuous like okay, every tenth of the book is 1 year. No, it's not like that. It's very heavily loaded towards the first 18 months, 2 years, very much like the first, yeah, more or less the first half of the book, more or less, from what I can remember after 4 months after reading it. And then a lot of it gets very accelerated. So the only issue with that is at times I find it a little bit hard to keep track exactly where, how much had really happened between the intervening periods.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit hard maybe at times, even though Chris did describe obviously the type that most of the chapters I think had some sort of time, not maybe a date in terms of the date and the day and the month and the year, but maybe some of them are more sort of general, like summer of whatever year. So you get a sense of how much
Mm-hmm.
time has passed, but still you maybe lose a little bit of the sense of what's happened in those intervening periods. Um, and the issue with that, especially it depends on what you're trying to get from the book. But in the latter portion of the book, he's really trying to talk about how his YouTube channel and career got going. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, if you're wanting to read the book from that sort of perspective, you might maybe lose sense of everything, all the trials and tribulations he's gone through, because he's only
Mm-hmm.
able to highlight the key sort of points in that journey.
Yeah,
Um,
that makes sense.
Obviously, if there's a lot of mundane stuff, you'd obviously cut it. I'm not saying it was wrong, but it's just something to be
Yeah.
aware of. It depends on what you want from the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I wanted to read it purely from a what's it like to be, well, it doesn't have to be Japan, but it had to be Japan. But what's it like for a person to go into a foreign culture, and what culture shocks did they experience? Everything that we've spoken about in this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because I was approaching it from that perspective, I didn't mind so much. But it's just something to be aware of. If you buy it from the perspective of how did somebody get started in YouTube in a foreign country, blah blah blah, then maybe there might not be as enough information. But I don't think the way that the synopsis and the way the book is marketed, it's not meant to be that. It's not like a
Yeah.
how to YouTube in Japan kind of
Right.
book. So it's fine. It's not as if it's
Yeah.
marketed in the wrong way. But it's just something to be sort of aware of. And it caught me off guard a little bit when I was reading it.
Mm.
I was like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
we've jumped a lot between those two chapters.
Yeah, I've thought about picking up the book. Like, I decided to sort of hold off because I wanted to have you do this sort of quiz to me cold without
Mhm.
looking up anything so that you could get my genuine responses for the initial, like my initial reactions. But I have thought about buying the book, so that'll be interesting to keep in mind going into it.
Mhm. Okay, well, we'll go through some stuff. We don't have to go through everything. I might pick it depending on where the conversation goes. We might bounce around a bit. In general, all my notes
Sure.
are in chronological order as per the book, naturally, because I read it in order.
Right.
Um, and there were some extra things added towards the end. The only thing I was going to start off with is just as a comparison to you. Um,
Hmm.
it must. I don't know what this quote was towards the end of my list, so I assume it was in the concluding paragraph or epilogue or something, or maybe it was in the synopsis. I can't remember now. But the quote I wrote down was, hopefully I didn't write it down wrong. Nothing about my first 18 years of my life hinted that I'd live and work in Japan. Um, which,
Okay.
from what I gather from talking to you, would be maybe because you've always been interested in Japanese culture.
Yes, it's like the polar opposite of me. Yeah.
But did you ever think
Uh,
I'm actually going to work and live there?
yes,
Okay.
yeah, it was. Yeah, so I had long been interested in Japanese culture and cultural products. Right, I grew up with Pokemon. I grew up watching anime. I grew up. Um, it wasn't just Pokemon. I also played a bunch of other JRPGs. Right, um, just a lot of other ways that I was experienced or I was exposed Japanese culture, and I always thought, oh, it would be like really cool to learn about Japan. And it sort of started to shift when I was in high school because my high school had a program where I could do distance learning, where they would have a local college broadcast their Japanese language classes to the high school.
Hmm.
And so I was like, oh, I can take Japanese as a subject in high school.
That's
And technically, it's through this like interconnected college program. And it because of that, it did not work very well. I feel like I took 2 years of Japanese in high school and basically learned nothing. But um, that's a lot of that came down to because the time they tried to make it so the time of the college class and the time of the high school class overlapped, but the schedules were really just incompatible. So
mm,
we never got to interface with the teacher. We had the person who was at the high school to be like, I'm in the room to make sure you're all on task, but they didn't know Japanese. They couldn't help us with any of the material. So it was okay, self study and try and figure out what's going on. And what it turned into was everyone in the class trying to work together to puzzle out what we were supposed to learn and how to take the like quizzes and tests and like match up with this college schedule that we weren't really on. And the information did not stick. It was very much just like we're going to learn it for this, and then we have no real way to practice it because again, nobody in the high school was actually good at Japanese or able to like prompt us to practice, and we were spending all our time trying to decipher the textbook. So
mm,
we didn't really get a lot of time to actually use the language we were studying. So it became a lot of studying to tests. But it got me started on the road. It was like, it was the thing that made me think, oh, this is within reach, right? I can learn this language. I can study about this culture formally. I can, when I go to college, like I can go and fly to the country and do a study abroad program there. And after that, it's like, okay, well, now I've lived in the country and I can go into the JET program and I'll be an English teacher in Japan. And by that point, that was part of my plan. Like, I have this moment that I remember I was sitting at another friend of mine. I was sitting at his house at his kitchen table, being like, everyone else seems to have figured out what they're going to do with their lives. What am I going to do with mine? I've been trying to keep all these different options open that I was potentially interested in that could be where like the direction that I took my life. And I was sitting at his table and was like, well, I really like reading and writing. I like English. I really like Japanese culture. I'm really invested in learning the Japanese language. I've I lived in Japan and I would like to live in Japan. What can I do? And I was like, I know what I can do. I can finish out doing language study in college, go for into the JET program for 5 years to actually finish learning the language because I knew by the time I graduated from college I wouldn't be ready to immediately jump into translating. Then become a professional translator because that puts to use both my love of the English language and my love of the Japanese language and both sort of you know the culture of both and storytelling and all that. And that will be the way that I can guide it. It was the moment I came up with a plan for how I wanted my future to go. And so when I went to Japan, it was a very deliberate thing on my part.
mm. It wasn't like a lot of. I mean, maybe going as far away as Japan is different. We see a lot inside Europe, especially with easy movement and stuff. People, it's a very whimsical kind of decision. Oh, I'll take a year out and I'll go to Spain to teach English. I'll go to wherever, southern Italy or something, right? As
Yeah.
almost a gap year, whimsical decision, and then when you're there, you discover yourself, right? Whereas for you, as you said, it's a very deliberate. Um,
Yes.
I now can't remember. Because Chris was talking about the remembering. Chris was talking about the whole interview process for the JET program. I can't remember.
Uh,
I cannot remember
that
now.
interview process was murder. Not well, the interview was particularly hard on me, but the whole process. you had to jump through all these hoops. It was ridiculous.
I remember you telling me, wasn't like the whole FBI involved and all this sort of
Yeah,
stuff?
you had to get you had to get yourself fingerprinted and then have those sent to the FBI for a criminal background check. You have to get a chest X-ray that you submit along with your application to prove that you don't have any respiratory
Ah,
disorders that people who are Japanese might be more susceptible to.
that's right.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. I should have written stuff about the interview because I did find it very interesting. I do remember Chris was trying. The tone of the interview was really hard to gauge in terms of should it be really serious or try and be a bit more dynamic. And it was just, yeah, it must be a really awkward
it
thing to
was
go through.
my interview was just brutal because they sat me down in this room and they were very good at not giving me any sort of feedback as to what they were thinking about my responses,
Mm-hmm.
right? They'd ask me a question and I'd give them an answer and they would sit there and they would then ask the next question. And at one point they asked me what felt like the same question again, and I just remember stewing and being like, what's happening? I already answered that question. Did my answer fail? Am I failing to communicate? What's going on? And
Oh
I firmly believe, because after I went through that whole big application process, I got waitlisted. I did not make the top cut to go to Japan straight away from the jet program. And so I didn't know when I graduated college, my whole plan, like I said, very deliberate. I was like, I'm going to do the jet program.
no. Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what I was going to do if that didn't come through, right? I was on the waiting list. There was a chance I could still go, but if it didn't come through, what was I going to do? And turned out, I was pretty high up on the wait list. And so you inevitably get people who drop out, and they called me in. And then, I ended up being one of the people who stayed on. By the time I left, I was, my supervisor had me rated as the highest ALT in the city. I
Look at that.
don't think that I don't think that to be fair to the other ALTs in the city, I don't think that criteria was a great reflection of actual like teaching ability. But it just goes to show you that, if you don't do great in the interview, you can still perform well on the job.
Right. But you say that, but that's the same for all types of jobs, right? You get people who clam up in interviews or whatever, but then as actually doing the day-to-day job, like interviews do not reflect a
Yeah.
person's
Oh
ability
yeah.
to do a job because it's not.
It's a general
Yeah.
yeah, it's a general truth. But yeah, it was just my experience. And to
Right.
look back and be like, wow, that there was a chance that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh,
Well,
that still gets me.
they did, and he got it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, just to check in terms of timeline. So obviously, if Chris or abroad in Japan has been, I'm saying Chris like as if I know him. Um, when I think it was 2012.
Mm-hmm.
Um, was that just when you were then leaving? If I get the timeline right, more or
We
less.
might have overlapped for about a year. I went to Japan starting in the summer of 2008. I left in the summer of 2013. Actually, no, it wasn't the summer anymore. That was when the jet program thing ended, but that's when I did my walk of Japan.
Right.
So I actually stayed on until like November, December. I can't remember exactly when, but it was 3 months
Okay.
walking Japan, and then I had like another week or so before the international flight that was going to take me back. So I ended up coming back at the end of 2013, just before 2014.
Right, which makes sense then, given your blog posts last year about the 10-year anniversary of the walk.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So
So it sounds like we overlapped for about a year.
right. Okay. That's right. Just in terms of getting timing, because obviously, yeah, as I said, you experience culture in terms of location and immersion and situation and stuff, but also timing,
Hmm.
depending on historical events and things. So, just for context, Chris was based. Well, I wrote down a place, but then I looked up on Wikipedia. It's a different place. Maybe this is a region. He was in northeastern Honshu. I'm going to
Oh,
butcher this pronunciation. I'm
wow.
so sorry. Tohoku.
Yeah, yeah. Same region as me.
Oh, look at that. So his Wikipedia says he was in Sakata.
Okay, I don't know Sakata off the top of my head. I probably
Sakata,
should.
it says Sakata, and then the province or prefecture, sorry, is Yamagata.
Yamagata. Okay.
Um,
Okay.
the way he introduced it in the book, if I remember rightly, is he had quite awkward things when he was on like the flight over when they had maybe they did it still did it with you that all the people who are new to the jet program had to meet in Tokyo
Yes.
for
Mm-hmm.
a somewhat initiation kind of meeting, and they do meetings with
Mm-hmm.
you to teach you things about potential culture shocks and this sort of stuff. And you'd be asking all
Yeah,
the others.
that was the like A plus culture shock presentation that
There
I
you go.
talked about in our culture shock episode. Yeah, the orientation.
Mm-hmm. Chris wasn't really listening. If I remember rightly, he wasn't really listening much during the meeting. He was just thinking about being
Uh,
so far away from home and Tokyo, and, and just because he was so jet lagged after the trip and everything. Um,
yep.
and he was asking everybody else, like, where are you based? And they're saying, like, Tokyo and Kyoto and all these places. And they're like, where are you going?
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, Tohoku or whatever. And they were like, cool. it, he, so, so when he had to take the next flight up to where he's going to be based, it was almost like this dread, like almost dread coming over him in terms of where am I going? I'm going to be isolated from all the other jet program teachers. I think there might be a couple who were somewhat close by to him, but
hmm
he was very much alone. It wasn't like he was in Tokyo, and even if he wasn't in the same school as another jet program teacher, he could easily meet somebody. So he
Yeah.
was quite somewhat isolated in terms of his experience. But that's where he was, and they kept talking about. He kept referring a lot to about the snow. Apparently, there's a lot of snow in that region.
hmm Yeah. That's one of the things they'll do. Is he from some place where it snows a lot?
Oh, that was the theme that kind of I wrote it in my notes, so I'm going to say yes. He did
Okay.
talk about the winters being quite harsh. Um,
Okay. Yeah, because I looked up on the map in that part of Yamagata, sort of towards the west coast.
mhm,
That's part of the region that the snow is like really intense.
yeah.
Where I was based, like there are parts. So I was based in Hachinohe City in Aomori Prefecture. Aomori Prefecture, there are parts of it that get tons of snow, but the I was on the East Coast, and that place, Hachinohe, doesn't get that much of it. So
Mm,
it wasn't as big of a concern for me. But I know that, particularly around that area of Tohoku, uh, there's a lot of snowfall that you have to take into account. And one of the things that they will do is if you're from an area of the world that it regularly gets a lot of snow, they will put you in parts of Japan that regularly get lots of snow. And so when I was like, "Oh, I'm from Connecticut, right? I'm from the northeastern U.S." They're like, "Good, perfect. You'll be good for this, like, way far north city in Japan, right?"
and then you don't know why until you get there.
Yeah. And everybody in their application says, like, and they tell you this, I think, during the application process, like, you can put down a preference, they
Mm.
probably will not listen to you. And everybody wants to teach in Tokyo, right?
Yeah, of
So
course they do.
they can't possibly do that. Um, yeah, and so my experience was a little bit different though because uh, I happened to come in a year where my own city, Hachinohe, at the time they had 8 ALTs, and like six of them, no, five of them, so all except three left. And the neighboring cities, it was a similar thing, right? So all these people who had been in the program just left at the same time. And so I
Mm.
was part of this initial group where just waves and waves of ALTs were going north to Aomori Prefecture. And so there was actually a ton of us who were headed there, and I didn't have to worry about being alone. There was just like, oh yeah, this is the Aomori group here, and there
Oh,
were
very
there
good.
were plenty of us to like talk back and forth about, where are we going? I wanted to be in Tokyo. I wanted to be in Kyoto.
There you
I
go.
was like, I'm kind of glad I'm off the beaten path somewhere. I like the idea, and I ended up really falling in love with Tohoku. I had a great time there.
Oh, that's good. You saw the sorry Tokyo. You saw the real Japan, quote unquote, right?
Oh yes, yeah, the quote unquote real Japan. Yeah.
So it looks like on the looking at the map, you're even further north than he was then.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I was way further north than him.
Ooh, there you go. Oh, that's good. It's good that you had that group, because like, it must have been because it's a culture shock going to any country, but especially one
hmm
so far from home. Um, Especially if you
Yeah.
don't know the language, because it seems to be implied. Maybe he knew a bit, but um, it seems like he didn't know as much of the language. going into it.
Yeah, I
So
don't, from the general impression, because I remember just from that one YouTube video, him being like, yeah, I didn't know the difference between Genki and Genkin, and I had to study up later. I was like, okay, I had a higher Japanese level when I went over to Japan.
and that helps
I
so
was
much,
already,
right?
yeah, I was already at an intermediate level. So that really like gave me a jump start to the process that was super helpful. We would get people who would come into our office in subsequent years who didn't know any Japanese, and their experience was just completely different from mine.
I
Just
can imagine.
completely different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because just even just your ability just to, I mean, we'll have to have a podcast at some point about language learning, but just your, especially when you're living and working there, right? When you're on a holiday, it's
Hmm.
different because you interact with people in a different way. But the minute you have to do day-to-day stuff,
Yep.
and if you can't even just do have the most basic conversation
Hmm.
through necessity by doing shopping trips, or if you have to sort of bureaucracy and all this sort of thing, it's and you're not even thinking about socializing and trying
Right.
to make a friend group when you're there. And if there's nobody then who is also in the JET program either, um,
Hmm.
it was tough. I mean, fortunately, from the book, he was describing that so he had quite there's an interesting dynamic in the staff room. There were some teachers who were very, very open to him. They
Hmm.
wanted to speak English as much as possible to him, and he had really funny conversations. And there were other teachers that were very standoffish, because
Hmm.
maybe they're maybe ashamed because of their English level or whatever. But
Yeah.
so he was quite lucky in the sense that he had a couple of teaching colleagues who sort of helped him out and got him a flat and showed him around the town a little bit. And I think
Hmm.
I remember there's another teacher who was just about to leave. There's maybe a transition period, and this other teacher
Hmm.
who was there gave him his car and sort of helped him sort of out in the first few months and showed him all the best places to drink and all this sort of thing.
Nice.
Before
Yeah.
he made his
There's
own friends.
was this person who was leaving a Japanese teacher?
No, I think he's an English teacher. I think
Okay.
it was also on the JET program, from what I can
Okay.
remember. Yeah, I think
I'm
I think it was another
trying.
a JET program teacher.
So it was probably part of the 1 month overlap because they do. They have new jets come in. At least when I was in the program, they had the new jets come in, like one wave in July and the other wave in August. And when I came in, I was in the August wave, which meant all the ALTs who were leaving had already left. But if you come in on the August group, you get to stay there when the July group, when the people who came in on the July group initially leave, and then the new July group shows up at the office, and there's like a 1 month overlap before the people who started in August then leave. So it was
Right.
probably that person.
Possibly. I
But if
can't
it was a
remember now.
Japanese teacher, if it was someone in the Japanese school system, there's also so the teachers can move around. They don't all like stay at the same school.
Interesting.
So yeah, I don't know how it is in Spain or the UK, but in the States, you go and you teach at a school, and you pretty much plan to stay there for a long time. Uh, in Japan, you go and the city like assigns you a school, and they rotate it, and you never teach at the same school for more than 10 years, and frequently you'll get rotated sooner than that. So sometimes you're only teaching at one school for 1 year, sometimes you're teaching there for 3 years, sometimes you're teaching there for any other sort of time frame in there where like you're not going to be there after 10 years, but you might move around before then too. So, and the Japanese school year doesn't quite line up with the JET program schedule, because the Japanese school year starts in April, and it runs through 3 different terms. So,
It's as if it's like we got telepathy between us. Like you're just saying everything that's on my bullet points. It's fantastic.
that's funny.
One of the notes I've got is the school year finishes in spring, which you've confirmed, which I found very
Yep.
shocking. And then it says
Hmm.
teachers move around because there was a situation where after the first year, a couple of the teachers who had been more friendly with Chris were something
Hmm.
like, "Yeah, we're leaving. We're going to a different city."
Yep.
Um, um,
Yep. That'll happen.
yeah,
From the
it,
outside, it seems to me, it still seems to me like a bad idea, right? It's supposedly, from what I remember, right? I haven't looked this up, but what I was told when I was initially part of the JET program was that it was like introduced as a measure to avoid corruption in the public office or something like that. You have to you can't stay in the same place in the same position for too long.
Okay.
And I don't exactly see how effective that really is going to be.
And you can do a lot of corruption inside 10 years before you have to leave.
I know. I know. And it's not like, who are the teachers that stick around for 10 years? It's usually the ones that are like, the ace sports club teachers, right?
Right.
Whose teams always go to nationals. It's like, okay, are you really going to tell me there's no corruption when the ace like volleyball club teacher is also the same person who's at that school for 10 years in a row and that school is really good at volleyball? Like, really? uh
We'll
but
see.
yeah, I don't know. It's how they do it. So
Mhm.
it's one of those things where maybe there's more value to it than I'm able to see from the outside. But personally, it seemed to me like it was nothing but a headache. And you would get these teachers who it's like, why were you assigned to the city? Because they'll live in the neighboring prefecture, right?
Oof.
They'll have this like some teachers when they're like posted to a school that's far away from where they live, right? They've got their own family they're trying to raise, and
Mhm.
they have to live you know, 4 hours away from the school that they're teaching at. And it's like, okay, well, that's not
Crazy.
feasible. I have to stay at a long term, like, I'm trying to think of an equivalent for like a minshuku, like a long term hostel uh, that's low cost that I'm just renting out on my teacher's salary so that I can make sure that the commute doesn't kill me every day and I'm
Right.
away from my family. It's
Yeah.
terrible. Now, to be fair, that situation is rare. I only heard of a handful of teachers that had to deal with that. But still, the system that makes that possible doesn't seem like a great one to me.
No, I agree. Um, at least from what I understand in the UK and Spain, um, I mean, teachers do move around, obviously, if they get a promotion opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Or if they um, you can do sort of sideways steps if they get maybe tired of teaching in one school, they can switch. But it's very much a case of, oh, and unless obviously you might get kicked out of a school if you do something stupid, but it's normally once you get the job, in theory, as long as you've done nothing, you don't do anything wrong, you have that job
Mm-hmm.
for life if you want it. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah,
That sounds very similar to what I'm used to in the US, where, like, yeah, teachers will move around, but it's self directed.
yes, yeah,
I remember when I first told my parents about that situation, they were like, "Whoa, one of the teacher's like best resources is the classroom because they know they're going to be in the same place all the time, so they can get their classroom to look exactly how they want and like set it up so that it's perfectly suited to their needs." And forget the fact that teachers move around frequently and they don't know if they should invest in a classroom. But also in Japan, it's not the kids who go from classroom to classroom when subjects change. The kids all stay in place and the teachers rotate.
mm,
So no teacher has the resource of the classroom. They all have to have their resources that they've got like handpicked and set up, like that they bring to school to them in their car and then have mobile and ready to go, right? That they've worked out on their desk, and that they can like bring to the classroom the day of the lesson.
so that I find really interesting. So it seems like the states and the UK do it the same way, where the it's in secondary school, in high school, not in primary school.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different story because you're with one teacher most of the time. But in high school, when you got multiple subjects, the students move and the
Mm-hmm.
teacher is a fixed thing. Whereas from what I understand, in Spain, at least the schools that I've seen, it's like in Japan. The
Hmm.
kids stay put and the teacher moves. And I'm trying to think, in Germany, is it the same? No, 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 no. In
I
Germany, the
imagine.
students
Okay, go ahead.
move. The students move in Germany.
Yeah. Okay,
The
that
except,
surprises me because I was going to say, like, I know that the Japanese school system is modeled on some European school systems. And so I thought the German school system might have been the one that it was modeled on for some reason.
I'm trying to
And in
remember
that case, I'm
now.
a little surprised that German students would move around. But
Again, it might
I don't
depend on
know.
the school because Germany has this system where when kids go from the primary school to secondary school, there are actually three tiers of secondary schools they can go into, depending if they
Hmm.
want. They have to do it. I think they have to do an exam when they reach the end of primary school. If they do very well, they can go into the gymnasium, which is the academic sort of fast track school, and then you got
Mm-hmm.
one in the middle, and then you got one that is more vocational. And I can't remember what the names of them are, which is terrible. I've
Hmm.
got names of in my head, but I can't remember what they all mean. You got the Gymnasium, you've got Hauptschule and Gesamtschule, but now I can't remember. One of them might be primary school. Now I can't remember it. It's been a long time since I've done
Oh
German.
no.
But in
Yeah.
Spain, they all move, and I don't like that. I don't like that the kids.
Mm-hmm.
I know the kids stay put and the teachers have to move because, as you said, the
Mm-hmm.
being brought up in a secondary school where the teachers had their own classroom. They have their own identity in the classroom. They can put up posters on the walls. They can organize projects how they want. They can leave stuff out. Doesn't matter because they can put it to one side. They're not going to annoy other teachers. I feel when I see, I don't know about the Japanese schools. I think maybe this came up in the book, but I can't remember. But for me personally, when I see the inside of Spanish schools, they look almost clinical.
Mm.
There will be some stuff up on the wall, but there isn't the same almost like soulmanship to it because it it's just a project that got randomly put up on the wall from one teacher kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas then another teacher will come in and won't care about what's on the wall. Um, it's not the same.
Interesting.
If you got a really
Interesting.
small, if you got a really small school where
Mm-hmm.
there's only one like class per year group, then maybe I could understand it because you wouldn't have enough teaching space to
Mm-hmm.
justify moving the kids around. Right, the kids
Mm-hmm.
have to stay put, unless it's something
Right.
special like a science class and they have to go to the laboratory or something. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I don't like it. I feel yeah, and I think about German schools. Even if the kids do move around, maybe they only move for certain subjects. Because I do remember when I remember writing a thing in German class after we came back from one of the school exchanges I did, and I remember writing that I didn't like their classrooms because they were so almost like a hospital because there was nothing on the wall. So
Ah,
maybe Germans they move only for certain subjects. Maybe
interesting.
depends. Maybe
Yeah,
I
and
have
it's not like kids don't move at all in Japan, right? You're talking about science classes; they have to go to the lab, right?
yeah
Gym classes, they have to go either to the gym or outside, right? They've got
yes
all these
they
different things that they do. My experience with the system in Japan is actually that the homeroom class and therefore the classroom that's associated with that homeroom actually has a very strong identity, a much stronger identity than it did in my school growing up. So
mm,
we would have classes in my like when I was going through school that were called homeroom, and they always felt like sort of an administrative convenience, right? They didn't feel like I didn't feel attached to the other students in my homeroom class. Whereas in Japan, the students in your homeroom class are the kids that you're with all the time, right? So you build stronger bonds with the people who are always in the same class for you for the whole year. Uh, and you also get things that like it'll be like, okay, this person is going to take care of lunch duty this day of the week. This next person's going to take care of lunch duty this day of the week. So they got like a chart for that. They got like so like who's in charge of what for each day. They've also got the specific things that they've done for like school spirit type things because they'll
mm,
do school spirit type activities for their homeroom class. And so it's not just like here's the stuff that all the students need to know, and so we've divided you up into these groups that technically aren't classes that will give you this information and allow us to handle these tasks. That stuff does happen too, but it's also like an excuse to get all of these students to really like bond with one another and form a more tight knit group that is the homeroom, that is the class,
right.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the personality of the classroom is a better reflection of that sort of homeroom group culture as a result. So
Interesting.
it's interesting to hear that like your experience with that sort of style is something of the opposite, where the classroom feels like pretty sterile because it can't be devoted to a subject.
Hmm. Um, Yeah, I agree with you in terms of I'm trying to figure we called them like registration classes, but it was only for you only be there for 10 minutes a day. You wouldn't actually do proper classes with your reg class.
Yeah.
My registration class was one of the IT classes. We were just there to just check that everybody was there. If there's any important news, you'd say it, and then that's it. We will go off into do our
Yep.
normal classes, and then your friend groups normally would be the people that, especially in the first couple of years of secondary school, if you're with them in class a lot with
Hmm.
your normal classes, not your registration group.
Right.
Even though,
Yeah, it
yeah,
was the
you make
same for
friends inside
me.
your registration group, but it's not the same.
Same for me when I was
Yeah.
growing up. And it totally transformed. So there's this book called Battle Royale, and they made it into a movie. It's this famous sort of scenario where these kids are sort of placed into this death game where they all have to kill one another. And when I read that book. I read that book in translation into English when I was in high school, and I was like, yeah, of course, all these kids are going to turn against each other, because my experience of homeroom had like no sort of bond between any of the kids in the school.
Right.
And then, I then and I worked alongside these teachers. Like I would experience sort of the homeroom culture, and having seen into the Japanese school system, I then decided at one point, I think it was because the Hunger Games books started coming out and people would compare them to Battle Royale.
Mm-hmm.
And you know me, I like big projects. So I was like, oh, let's compare them. But now I know Japanese. So I'm gonna read the Hunger Games in English and I'm gonna read Battle Royale in Japanese, and I'm gonna see what I think of this sort of comparison. And when I read Battle Royale in Japanese, like I was sort of ready for how different of an experience it was going to be to read it in the original language as opposed to in translation in English. What I was not ready for was how my experience, like with the Japanese school system, being inside a homeroom class, changed my entire perspective on what the setup for the scenario was, where these kids are like wearing these explosive collars and forced to kill their homeroom classmates. Because I was
Goodness.
like, oh man, these are all like, they've got their friend groups, they've got
Mm-hmm.
their whole like, spirit of the school wrapped up into this. It's a lot harder than
Right.
I ever could have appreciated with my own background. Right, nothing
Mm-hmm.
about the book had changed, but my experience and understanding of the culture had changed, and that completely influenced my experience of the book. I was just like, whoa, that was
Interesting.
different.
Yeah.
That was very cool.
That's fascinating. I'm trying to think, just even for me personally, yeah, all my close friends were not in my registration class. It was just like a random collection of students that you saw for 10 minutes every day, and that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I guess from the Japanese perspective, or any sort of competition or whatever against with your home group or home class against another, oh no problem. But the minute you
Hmm.
try to, yeah,
Yeah, that's
cause
part
any
of the
conflict between them.
relationship. Sorry,
No, no, on you go.
I think I cut you off.
No, no, I was at the end of my point.
Oh, okay. But that's exactly right, right? Like the part of the strengthening of the bonds comes in events like, if you've seen a lot of like Japanese related media, you'll know about Culture Festival. Well, how do they come up with what they do for the Culture Festival? Everyone in the home room works together to figure out what their theme is going to be. They give themselves jobs, and then they go and they execute on those jobs. And their classroom has their own unique theme that they all decided on, that everyone has their own roles that they're playing within that theme, and they've all worked it out for themselves how their homeroom is going to put out that like thing for the culture festival. And then you've also got sports day, and it's like, okay,
Right.
everybody in this homeroom, like first of all, sports day, everybody in this year is going to be on the same team, and you're competing against like other like homeroom group factions. So it's not necessarily just homeroom against homeroom. There are like other like aspects to the sports festival competitions, but some of that is like, okay, this homeroom versus this homeroom, how's it going to go, right? But by creating that sort of rivalry between the homerooms and also the school years and also the different like some depending on the school, right? You get groups of homerooms as opposed to just one homeroom against another homeroom all the time, which is why I'm sort of being vague about this. But that still creates this like in group out group dynamic where the homeroom is sort of the base unit of this is my team.
Hmm. Yeah. Was Hmm. See, if I don't have a huge, I mean, I don't have experience much of it in terms of teaching in the UK. Some schools might do it differently. In Spain, again, not a huge amount of experience, but maybe depending on who the teacher is for that tutor group, you might do certain activities together. Um, so it might be a case where there is almost like a soul to the tutor class because you'll do certain projects together. But in
Mm-hmm.
terms of going back to the sort of the classroom and how it looks, again, I'm sure it always depends on the individual school and the individual teacher, right? If there's a teacher who wants to decorate the classroom with the tutor group or whatever, then they would. But I
Mm-hmm.
feel a lot of, yeah, and I think, yeah, Germany was the same. Maybe it was just a school rule. But then seeing even Spanish schools at times, I'm thinking, oof, it's a little bit clinical. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I actually like, as much as I enjoyed the trips to Germany as a teenager on the school exchange, I like coming back to my own school and knowing that every time I walk past a classroom, I can see the teacher's name outside, and you know that they're there, and then
Mm-hmm.
they've got all their, they can put whatever projects they want on the wall, and they can decorate it how they like. It all depends. My wife's inside the Spanish school system, and she's a lot more, she's of a younger generation, obviously, and more creative in terms of wanting to try and personalize the classroom a little bit for her tutor group, and she'll have you know, she'll have British and Scottish flags all over the place and that sort of thing. It's
Nice.
just not quite the same.
Yeah.
But I think also it doesn't help. We've talked about it before that Japanese people, but also Japanese students in general, have maybe a little bit more respect for the school in terms of its appearance and looking after their classroom and this sort of thing. Um, was
Right.
maybe I'll say at least for most of the European, at least the European countries that I'm aware of, that maybe there's a little bit of a lack of respect in terms of society and this sort of thing, right?
Yeah. I definitely think the like general cultural norm is one of respect for the school in Japan, and like not just the not just the school in terms of the people who are in it, but the actual school building.
Right, the
And
infrastructure, right?
yeah, because they have to clean it, they have to take care of it, they have to actively manage it. And some of that, right? Whenever we talk about this culture stuff, I get a little bit antsy because there's always exceptions, right?
Yeah, of
There's
course it is.
people in Japan who don't care at all about school buildings or even the other people in their schools. There's people in Japan who don't feel like they're part of their homeroom, right? They're who are sort of getting left behind, right? It's not a perfect system, and there are exceptions everywhere. But sort of the general, I think, big picture takeaway, I think, is that they do value schools as the school buildings more than anyone in the U.S. ever valued our school building, where I found all the pencils I ever needed just thrown away on the floor. I just pick them up and put them in my backpack. I had this gigantic collection of pencils. I never had to buy one. As soon as I got into middle school, I never had to buy any pack of pencils ever again. Uh, it's just so much strewn about as garbage. So,
Yeah, I had a run in with a student a couple of years ago. Um, Albeit that particular class was deliberately trying to wind me up. It was a case
mm,
of going in to teach extracurricular classes inside, even though I was employed by a language school, to go into a secondary school and teach extracurricular English. So it was hard enough for them having to spend their lunch hour doing extra English when all of their other classmates were, doing homework or chatting or whatever. And obviously, then the minute it becomes anything extracurricular, oh, my parents are obligating me to do this, right? I've heard that so many times. And then you have to say,
hmm
yeah, and why are they obligating you? Because for your future, but typical, you're talking to teenagers who want to rebel. And then,
right.
I think it's also just like a generational thing where, I don't know, maybe it's me getting old, but I feel and it means every generation says this about the next generation that comes after them, right? That, oh, these young people don't
hmm
have any respect. There's one kid in particular who was deciding on that day he wanted to draw on the table,
hmm
and cue, me trying to keep any sort of composure, and
mm
and
hmm
uh, and just like there was just the attitude in terms of, oh, or why should I care? The school has cleaners.
hmm
It's their
Yeah.
job. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I don't know. It just
Mm.
drives me
Yeah.
nuts.
Yeah. That would bother me too.
Uh, and just yeah. Just and well, how would you like if I come to your room and write all over your desk? And
Right.
they're trying to back out. Well, that's not the same thing. Why?
hmm Yeah.
Like,
You can
just
you can get someone to clean it up too. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Oh dear, drive me
Yeah.
nuts. But anyway, um,
Yeah. I
there's actually
translated this.
Oh, you go.
Sorry.
Carry on. No, no, you carry on.
Okay.
Because I was going to move on to a different point, which is connected. So you carry on.
Yeah, I translated this one game, going back to the whole respect thing, and there's this scene where the students have been living. It's sort of this thing where they're transported into this other world, and it's this like harsh environment that they're unfamiliar with that they need to figure out, and they end up taking shelter in a school. And so, like towards the end of the game, one of the characters stands up and gives this speech about how they all need to show respect for the school building that has served as their shelter for so long before they go home. And they all go, and there's this heartfelt moment where they all bow towards the school. And I remember
Oh.
translating this and just thinking, this is such a Japanese thing to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was what I was when you were talking about how they have respect for the actual school building. I was like, some of them do.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them probably don't. But you know, enough people in Japan like feel that way that you can get a scene like that in a video game.
Right. It's enough for it to be the norm in that
Yeah.
sense. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing I was going to sort of I'm bouncing around notes, but that's fine because we're talking about that sort of mentality and sort of this group inside sort of the home classes. So there was a thing that was mentioned in the book, and I believe I've never heard it before, so I believe it's a Japanese proverb that has been translated. And the
Okay.
mentality that they were trying to teach was a single arrow is broken, but not 10 in a bundle.
Oh, I haven't heard it translated that way, but I've heard that expression.
Okay. So it's the whole
Yeah, I
idea
think
about you have to be strong as a team, team
yes.
mentality. In that sense, you somewhat look after each other. Um, but the way that then, from as an outsider, as Chris was seeing it, it was almost as if, and I think maybe European schools might fall into this a little bit, this trap a little bit as well, but maybe to
Hmm.
more of an extreme in Japan, that the objective seemed to be from using that proverb was to create this class of model students, but there was very little room for rule breaking and creativity and divergence from the norm. I don't know how you feel about that.
That seems like a pretty accurate statement to me. I don't know how much I can like elaborate on that, but that sounds pretty accurate to me. I feel like one of the things about Japan is that it doesn't do different very well.
Okay.
Uh, like my dad will talk about this because he works helping teachers help students with special needs, and he'll talk about this in the context of the U.S. educational system. Um, but Japan, I think, is sort of in a similar place where if you do the expected thing, they are very good at knowing how to deal with that. And you can see this not just in schools. You can see this like if you go out and are ordering something, right? And this is actually influenced. This is an aspect of Japanese culture that's influenced the way I do things in America now. Where if you go out to a restaurant in Japan and they've got something on the menu, and you say, "Oh, I'd like that hamburger, right? But I want it cooked this way, and I want you to take off this thing that's on it and substitute this other thing." And uh, you customize your order as you go, right? You're used to being able to do that as an American customer. That's very common. And in Japan, it's like you don't do that ever. If it's not part of the way the order is designed, like if you want anything different, it's just like it's impossible. It's like, no, I'm sorry, we cannot do that. We can't do it. It's like, what do you mean you can't
Starbucks
do it?
wouldn't be able to exist in Japan.
Well, they do exist in Japan. Like I think it's a little bit different if you've got a menu that you're supposed to like have things interact with, right? So if
Right.
the whole
Okay.
idea is you tell us your specific order, I think they can make that work. But if the idea is here's this order,
Right.
and you come in and say, "Oh, I want this part of this order and this other part of this order, I want you to put them together." They will tell you, "Oh, we can't do that." It's like, why not? You have both orders. It's like, yeah, but we can't do that. We can't. You got to get the set, right? You got to get the predetermined thing.
So now that you've gone back to America, do you limit your customization?
Absolutely.
of
Yeah,
many items.
that's the thing. That's the thing about Japanese ordering that has rubbed off on me is I'm just like, no, I'm just gonna get whatever the option is, right? The people will ask me about like customization. I was like, I want this. And they'll be like, do you want to change it in this or this way? And I'm like, no. I answer no to all the questions. And it's like sometimes most of the time they're like, okay, fine. But every now and then I'll get someone who like seems surprised that I'm not gonna do anything to the order. And I'm just like, nope, I just want it as it comes.
uh,
Easier
I
for you, easier for me. I'd rather adjust like myself, right? If it sounds like something, if it sounds like you've got a special that I'm interested in, but I may or may not like, and I can pinpoint the part of it that I may or may not like. Say there's some special sauce that's on it, and it's like, ooh, this is made with what's a controversial ingredient? Um,
oh,
blue
what's
cheese.
well, okay,
Go ahead.
that is potentially controversial. Not for me, but I was going to say, what does a Rookamania find controversial? Do you find blue cheese controversial?
I think blue cheese is controversial. My take on food, and this has sort of been influenced by my time in Japan. My take on food is I think it's very easy to decide that you do or don't like a certain food, but I don't think that's accurate. I think what you can say is you do or don't like a certain food in a specific context. So when I was growing up, I used to say I don't like cheese at all, and that's something that as time has gone on, I've realized I don't. I'm not a fan of raw cheese, but
Okay.
if you take it and you do something with it, it transforms the experience of having that food, of having that particular ingredient. So if you take that cheese and you put it on a burger, it turns out I like cheeseburgers. When I was a kid, I would customize my order. I'd be like, I don't like cheese. Don't put that cheese on my burger. But right, like now, right, I take that and I'm like, okay, sure, I do like. I may or may not like any cheese, right? Blue cheese in particular, I think is somewhat controversial for a lot of people. Maybe not everybody, like, clearly not you, but
Because I
I
like blue
think,
cheese.
yeah, well, it's
But
got a
yeah,
sharp taste,
it
right?
is very. I mean, it's quite okay. Let's put it this way: if I was opening a restaurant, I would not make the assumption that everyone would want the blue cheese sauce.
Right. So if you've got something and it's like, okay, it's this whole thing with blue cheese sauce. In the States, you could be like, okay, I'm just going to take that off. In Japan, they might be able to do that for you, or they might just be like, we can't do that. Depends on how flexible the staff at that particular restaurant are, and so I would just stop doing it. And what I discovered was that a lot of the stuff that I thought I wouldn't like, I liked in that particular combination. Maybe on this particular burger, that blue cheese sauce is going to transform an ordinary taste sensation into something extraordinary. And I would rob myself of that experience by not trying it. And I had enough of those experiences in Japan that when I came back to the States, I was like, you know what? I'm going to stick with this. I'm going to be like,
Mm.
maybe I don't like that ingredient, but rather than avoid it and never experience it in that specific combination that I'm imagining they've put together because other people generally find it to be pleasurable, right? Maybe I'll like it too, even though I don't like that ingredient in isolation. And so I've just taken to being like, okay, let me see that, let me experience this food as it comes. And then afterwards, if I want to make a modification, theoretically I can. In practice, I don't. But theoretically, if I order something standard off the menu and I have the experience and I'm like, this one aspect of it didn't work for me, I can always still then go back, and if I ever try and order it again, I could be like, okay, but hold that one ingredient, right?
Right. Or you wait until you find, if you're in a different restaurant or something, a variant that eliminates the particular
Mm-hmm.
factor that you didn't find agreeable or whatever.
Yes.
I think it definitely
Yeah,
helps
but that's
when you go either to college or in this case when you go into a completely different culture because
mm-hmm.
you have to adjust and you have to try
Mm-hmm.
new things. Otherwise, life gets incredibly difficult very fast.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. But I think that's sort of a broader illustration of the point that I think Japan doesn't necessarily do different very well. And
Mm.
so to bring that back to the whole like, bundle together, work as a group, right? The what that means is everybody be normal, right?
There's enough.
Everybody fit in this box so that we don't have to deal with difference. And if someone just stubbornly refuses to go into that box, there are solutions for that, right? So there are special ed schools that they have in Japan, but they don't work exactly the same way that we would necessarily want or treat special ed students in the US. Actually, my dad, I got like a special permission for him to come and like be part of not just my school days, but also experience what it's like to teach special ed. And so they have like special ed classes within normal schools. They also have separate schools that are just for students with special needs. And so the US has a sort of similar system. We tried I think it's called like mainstreaming, where we try to have kids with special needs in the regular
School. Yeah.
educational curriculum. But some kids need so much support that they really can't work in that environment. And
Yeah.
so they have to have their own special needs schools. So that like larger superstructure works similarly, but the actual specifics can be very different. And so my dad got like a special tour of like this is our like normal school and how we treat special ed and special needs student, and this is our special ed school and how we treat the kids with special needs students there. And because it's his area of expertise, he was able to get a lot of information about how the two cultures do it differently. Unfortunately, I'm not my dad and I can't give you a like detailed breakdown of that particular perspective. But uh, it was interesting to him the way that Japan treated the kids differently, and I think it can be an example, although one that I wish I could speak to better than I actually can about how if you're not going to act in line with the group in Japanese schools, you may not have the best time.
So there's another quote that I wrote down, and I've written the Japanese, but my worry is I'm gonna butcher this pronunciation so badly. I'm not even gonna attempt it because I don't want to say something rude. So the English translation that was given to me was the stick, or yeah, the stick that sticks out, which doesn't really make sense. Well, the stick that sticks out gets beaten down.
Mm-hmm.
That was kind
Yes.
of the thing where you need to conform, otherwise you're in. I mean, I think that's probably the same in most countries, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
conform, it's especially being as an adult, it's different because you have a little bit more independence to be able to try and find people that you can conform with. You can find your own in group. But as a
Yeah.
especially as a teenager, that's really tough if you don't conform for whatever reason that may be. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
then yeah, your life could even in I think even the UK, which I'd like to think, and even Spain, I'd imagine, which I'd like to think are fairly open societies, relatively speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Never perfect, of course. There's always things we can do better, but that's still hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
So if the overriding feeling inside the culture is conformity is key, yeah, that's gonna be a tough,
Yeah, there's
tough
a
thing to get through.
lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure in that sort of need to fit in, right? Need
Yeah.
to not be abnormal. Not just like be normal, not be abnormal, right?
Yes.
It's interesting the way that that was translated because I've heard that phrase translated before, and the way that I'm used to hearing it is the nail that sticks out gets hammered down.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Maybe the particular translation from that book is a little closer to the Japanese expression, but I like
Unless I
the
wrote it down
sound of
wrong, which is also possible. I've got to
also
check my
possible.
notes just in case.
Yeah. But yeah,
Mm.
that is one of the dangers I think because one of the broad generalizations that I'm generally that I tend to be scared of because I think they're a little bit too open and potentially misinterpreted. But still, one of the broad generalizations that people do make and that I think there's some validity to about Japan versus the U.S. in particular, and probably other quote unquote Western countries, while we're throwing generalizations around, um, is that Japan and Asia in general tends to be more of a communal, community based sort of society, whereas we're more individualistic in the West, right?
Right. Yeah.
And yeah, I think, like I said, there's something to that generalization, but it sort of makes me a little bit leery. I tend not to like to jump straight to those sort of definitive statements about broad groups of people because, of course, there are people in Japan who are happy to be different, right?
Yeah, of course.
And who are
Right.
happy to live their lives as individuals. And it's not like every aspect of life in the United States is atomized down to the individual level, right? There's still such thing as community.
Yeah, of
We're
course.
human beings. We're not like fundamentally different creatures of these different parts of the world, right?
Hmm.
As massive the changes that culture can be, everybody's human underneath.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel it's like from an evolutionary standpoint, right, community is important.
Hmm.
So from an individualistic perspective, but then it's tricky. We're living in a world where you're exposed to so many different things, and
Yeah.
everyone's gonna have different tastes, and references, and then as soon as you start even then thinking about other more complex things, like intrinsic things, not just a taste or interest, but things like sexuality and appearance and all this sort of stuff, then
Mm-hmm.
it's just a melting pot for different things to happen. And yeah, and also then we're talking about
Yeah.
time period as well, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
we're living in a modern era where, thankfully, for most there are countries which are the exception, but most people live in relative freedom. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I just find it interesting. Um, um, just
Yeah.
how it was just
Didn't think
it's just
I
the
didn't
two
think I'd have
sides,
much.
right?
Yeah, I didn't think I'd have much to say on the whole single arrow versus bundle of arrows thing, but apparently I did.
Well, that's the thing. You don't know until we talk about it. You don't know,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so uh, where do I go? I've got a list. I've got so many notes. I'm trying to think where on earth do I go here. Okay, so again, kind of talking about society again. We're generalizing that there is this politeness in
Mm-hmm.
Japanese society. We've talked about respect before, the way that the language is formed and how you refer to your elders and all this sort of thing. So there's a very sort of quick thing that I found quite funny, how Chris had an experience where I can't remember where he was in this, what social situation it was, but he was just talking to this other Japanese guy, and it was a really friendly conversation, just a normal
Mm-hmm.
conversation between two people in a bar or wherever it was, right? But the
Yep.
second that this Japanese guy discovered that he was older than Chris, he suddenly turned into, like, it was almost like he activated senpai mode.
Yep.
And he started giving him like this worldly wisdom,
Yep.
which I found very funny.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing was, this is maybe not such a nice a topic, but I just found it was quite shocking to me when I wrote it, and that's why I have to write this down. This balance between the stereotype, again, we're stereotyping and generalizing, between Japanese in general
Mm-hmm.
politeness, but also I have seen the way it's been written through the book is there is this almost uh, in Japanese it's called, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation again, I'm really sorry, ijimi, almost entrenched bullying.
Ijime. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, ijime. Okay, I do apologize. We should have done
Yeah.
Japanese lessons for doing this. Entrenched bullying, and there's a thing you probably might have heard of it, the Metabo law or
Oh yes.
Metabo
Mm-hmm.
law, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyone doesn't
Mm-hmm.
know, there's a thing where is it just inside the public system where you have to get your weight measured and your waist circumference taken,
Measured.
and
Yep. Mm-hmm.
yeah, um,
They were
and
introducing that when I was leaving. So it makes sense because Chris
oh,
was coming in as I was leaving. It makes sense that he would have been exposed to that on his way in.
right, and Chris talks about it in the book, and I don't know his health state now, but was implying during the book, or maybe more than implying, that maybe he was a little bit overweight. Let's just say it like that in a very
Mm-hmm.
vague way.
Mm-hmm.
And he would start getting certain comments from
Mm-hmm.
his colleagues when they would see him eating a chocolate bar or something about, that he was putting on weight and these sort of things.
Mm-hmm.
um, and I just, how he found this very shocking, that you got this, again, as I said, this society that is brought up on politeness and all this sort of thing, and then suddenly there's all these little sort of jabs at
Yeah.
him for being
That's
overweight
very
and this sort of thing.
it's very real. And the thing is, right? What do you mean by politeness? So there's two things when I think of politeness. First of all, uh, in general, in terms of like we've talked before about how politeness is sort of codified into the language. What that also means is that if you are in a situation where you know that you're supposed to be polite, in the general tenor of the conversation, right? If you know I'm supposed to use the polite forms of these verbs and nouns and whatever, you
Mm-hmm.
have massive power to be impolite. I
Ah, I
mean,
see. Right. Mm-hmm.
you might not, but if you all of a sudden don't use polite speech, you're going to seriously offend the other person, right? And whereas in a culture where you don't have that built into the language, you're not going to offend someone with your choice of verb, right?
You have to be
You
more,
can
a lot more from the tone of the way you speak, rather
yeah,
than just the outright words you use.
yeah, you can offend them in other ways, but
Yeah.
you're not going to offend them like from the formulation of the grammar, right, or anything like
Yes.
that.
Hmm.
So, um, so there's that aspect of things that first came to mind where you're like, oh yeah, Japan's like very concerned about politeness. Yes, it is, but I think that can also like transitioned into how they'd also be very conscious of snubs, right? Because
Mm,
subtleties in politeness will convey different messages. So it's like, I'm not necessarily being directly rude to you, but I'm going to send you a relatively subtle signal that you're making a mistake right now.
right.
Or you make a faux pas and it's like, oh, why does that person never talk to me these days? It's because you said something out of place from a long time ago. Foreigners in general get a little bit of a pass for this because it's just uh, Japanese people know that you're not necessarily as knowledgeable about Japanese culture, right? So the sort of higher level snubs and back and forth in terms of politeness don't always get applied to foreigners. And they're not completely immune, but I think people give them a bit more leeway than they would a Japanese person, for instance. And yeah, I think that sort of ties in with like they might be using polite speech. They might be making these comments sort of obliquely, but they will still bring them up, right? Because they're trying to bring you in line. It gets back to that whole like Japan doesn't do different very well thing. They don't let people alone in their difference. Everybody has to be part of the group. If you're not conforming, maybe we got to nudge you back in line, right? So,
Mm,
but we
they
don't want to
make
be
it.
rude.
They want.
So,
They want to be clear that you are acting in a way that's different. They're not going to let it slide in any way.
right. But they don't necessarily want to be rude, right? So they're not going to come
Right.
up to you and say, like, man, you're much too fat. Like, I'm concerned for your health, right? They're not going to. I'd be shocked if Chris Broad was writing about people who came up to him in Japan and were like, hey, fatty, slim down.
But they'd say something like, "Oh, you've eaten too many of them today," or something, right? Something a little
It's
more.
like, oh, you sure do like those chocolates, right? That's a very Japanese way of being like, maybe you should slow down, buddy.
Hmm.
Right? Because the formulation is polite. It's just not the intention isn't, right? So I think this also sort of gets to that idea, right? There's the easy superficial generalization of, oh, Japanese people are so polite, and it's like, yeah, they're still human, right? They're still
Yeah.
gonna look to inform your behavior if they can, right? They're just gonna express it differently. So
Hmm.
they're gonna very politely and obliquely give you a hard time about being overweight.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's even harder than for a
Yeah.
foreigner because you might think that they're just being very polite and ask you a very general question like, "Oh, you like chocolate, don't you?" But
Mm-hmm.
there might be this
Yeah.
undertone of,
It might, yeah, it could very easily come across as just completely innocent and go over the person's head. That's part of why I think foreigners get a little bit of a pass in Japanese culture is because they can be oblivious to those sorts of signals, and Japanese people don't know what to do about that.
right. just just imagining a
This
scenario
reminds
where
me,
you ask something like that, like, "Oh, you like chocolate, don't you?" With this undertone of you need to stop eating them,
yeah,
and the foreigner's like, "Oh yeah, I do. Thanks for noticing.
why, why don't you buy me some more? Yeah,
Would you like some?"
yeah.
Oh
This
dear,
actually
I.
calls to mind a scenario I've written that's actually about British culture, where it was from this book. I think it was a Dirk Gently book. I think it was Douglas Adams. Anyway, he was writing about this scene, and this guy was describing how he was sitting down at lunch or whatever. I'm not entirely sure of the specifics. It's been a long time since I read this passage, but he's sitting down and he's having some scones, and someone sits down in this cafeteria across from him, reaches into his bag of scones and starts eating his scone. And the guy telling the story is like, I didn't know what to do. And the person he's telling the story to is like, okay, so what happened? It's like, nothing. We both just kept eating. He was like, I went in and took a bite of the scone, and they both just sat at the table across from each other eating. And this person was just eating his scone, and he was eating
Oh,
his scone, and they just sat there just silently, never fully acknowledging it. And then the guy was like, okay. And then the guy got up, and I saw they were left on the table because the other guy took the bag and was going to go throw it away, and left on the table was his bag of scones.
no.
So he was actually doing the thing that he thought was being done to him.
Oh wow.
And because nobody stopped to communicate to be like, hey, that's my scone. What are you doing?
Oh.
They were trying too hard to be obliquely polite, and they both just had this very awkward situation where this guy was misbehaving and didn't even know it.
Yeah, I've I don't know. Again, generalization, right? There's always gonna be
Yeah,
things to break that rule, but yeah, British
I don't know how true
people.
that is of British culture, but it makes me think of right the
Yes.
power of obliviousness sometimes.
Yeah, I would agree. Um, there is that generalization that British people hate confrontation. We
Hmm.
the oh, I didn't want to bring this up on the podcast, but we were talking about it off camera, right? That my wife and I are currently binging the incredibly highbrow TV show, which is Desperate Housewives.
Yes.
um, late night entertainment when we're tired and don't want to watch anything exceedingly complicated. And there was a scene. If anyone who's seen the show, there's a British guy in there, and he's having a bit of a tussle with an American, and the American does say to at one point, "Oh, come on, you're British. You can deal with it. Stiff upper lip, right?"
Uh,
We do have this connotation of being, yeah, stiff upper lip. Don't confront problems. Just out
hmm
of politeness, just deal with it. Don't actively engage, right?
hmm
Whereas we might maybe view, again, generalization, that across the pond, you're far more direct.
hmm
And again, there are obviously British people who break that rule, and there'll be Americans who break that rule. And that was the thing that I maybe said in one of the culture shocks when I came to Spain. Spanish people are
hmm
way, way, way more direct.
hmm
And it comes across as being extremely rude to a British person. And there have been
hmm
times where I've got thoroughly pissed off. But obviously, I can't say it out loud until
hmm
I'm alone with my wife and I start ranting
Oh yeah,
about
yeah.
whatever. Because my wife sees me at my worst, right? And I start getting really pissed off, and she's just like, "But they didn't say it that way." I was like, "I don't
hmm
care. That's how I heard it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what they meant. That's how I heard it. So I'm pissed off now."
Yeah.
But on the flip
Oh, I
side,
bet I've done that. I bet I've done that to both British and Japanese people.
well, you told me about the story. Was that off camera or on camera? Of the you had a run
The
in with a
woman
British.
who was actually asking for my help, yeah, who I thought was just telling me what she was gonna do. She's like, I can go take care of this. I was like, okay, go take care of it then.
As soon as you started explaining to me, I knew immediately. Yeah, that's British code for I want to do this thing, but I don't know how to do it. Help me.
Yep.
uh,
Yeah.
but British people
Yeah. I
also,
wonder. Actually, I just remembered something.
yeah.
It's nothing to do with the main topic, but another potential British person I offended.
Oh
This
no.
guy like asked me over. He was not just me. He was throwing a party, and of the people who showed up, he was like, "Does anyone want anything to drink?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'll have some tea." And he was like, "I've got all these different types. What type do you want?" And I asked for one type of tea, and then I finished it, and I was like, "Okay, that was great. I want this other type of tea." And he was like, "Okay," and then he made me that, and then I was like, "Okay, now I want this other type of tea." And I went through like all the different types because I was like, I just want to try all these different teas, and something about the way he like interacted with me like after that gave me the impression that he thought I was like some kind of monster. And I never fully got the story. I tried to bring it up. I tried to like later on be like, "Oh man, I remember you threw that party and I tried all those teas. That was great." And he gave me another weird like, "What are you doing, man?" sort of look. And so I wanted to ask if that was some sort of major faux pas.
So, when we say things like "make yourself at home, try whatever you want," we probably don't mean it. I think you might have taken advantage of him a little bit.
Oh no.
But I find that very funny. Uh, oh, that's hilarious. Wow, you poor guy. He just ravaged his entire like tea collection. Yeah, he had
Yeah,
nothing left at
probably.
the end of the night. He just opened it. He just opens up the tea cupboard like the next day. Just thinking, now which one of these boxes has been defiled by that American, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, poor guy. Was it? I need to ask. Was this in Japan or was this back in the States?
Yeah, no, this was in Japan. No, I don't know
Okay.
any British people in the States. Yeah,
Oh, okay. I had no idea. Okay,
yeah.
that's fine. Yeah, I think we'll offer things. Oh, we always offer a cup of tea, but I think there'll be.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I would I would only ever want to go in for like a second offering of something if it was
Mm-hmm.
really obvious that the person was offering me it. I've been in a situation before with friends where, I mean, it could be anything when I go around to like board game nights with friends, or they're offering me tea, or maybe if we've had dinner and they're offering ice cream or something. Even if I want more, I always
Mm-hmm.
rein it in because I have to feel like I have to wait for them to offer
Mm-hmm.
me something. If
Mm-hmm.
they then say after you finish the cup of tea, would you like another one? I will often then will offer this typical thing that happens with people. The person replying would be like, no, well, I could, and then you have to wait for the other person to almost initiate the conversation again and say, no, no, you can have another one if you want, and then you say, okay, I'll
Ah,
have another one then. Yeah,
okay. Because the
yeah.
guy, to be fair to me, the guy did ask if I wanted more. It was just I kept saying yes, and apparently that was not the thing to do.
Oh god, that's even worse. He was trapped by politeness, and you
Yeah,
thought he was generally being nice and offering you
I
stuff.
thought he was genuinely wanted to give me more tea.
uh, that's funny.
The power of obliviousness.
Yeah. Oh, it's ignorance is bliss, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I feel like I've probably done that to Japanese people too. So I think that's a sort of commonality between the two cultures there.
well, you give them something to talk about, I guess. There was this American
Yeah,
guy who was
probably.
drinking all my tea.
I know.
Oh, that's awesome. Um, yeah, I think I was going to talk about was British people also, along with the stiff upper lip sort of politeness kind of thing, we do passive aggressiveness quite well.
Hmm.
And I feel when you start explaining, albeit not on a topic that's very nice in terms of weight issues and things, but it'd be kind of funny to have a Japanese and a British person who could somehow understand each other in the same room and see who could be the most sarcastic or be the most passive aggressive. The two of them.
Mm.
The most
Yeah.
typical one I often teach my students is if you hold a door open for somebody in the UK and that
Hmm.
person does not say thank you to you, you still reply, "You're welcome" to them.
Oh, yep. Hmm.
And depending who the person is, you might say it under your breath. You want to say it just loud enough that they hear it, but not loud enough that they think you're being confrontational. So it's like this
Oh, yeah.
game you're constantly trying to
You gotta
play, right?
strike that balance. That's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah. And the minute it'd be if you say it a little bit too loud, and you see them turn and lock like
Mm.
a death stare at you, and they're like, "What did you say?" You just go running. Nothing. I said
Yeah.
nothing.
That's
um,
funny.
no, we like passive aggressiveness, and so I think my wife hates British sarcasm so much, and she
Mm.
likes American sarcasm because it's a lot more
Oh, that's funny.
open and obvious.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas
American sarcasm is hard to miss.
right, whereas British people can do that too. We can do
Hmm.
the obvious over the top sarcasm, but we also like one of the big uh sort of most popular forms of humor is what we call
Hmm.
deadpan.
Hmm.
If everybody, I assume in the States you have it too, but I don't know how common it is and
Yes.
how popular it is. Anyone who's watching who is maybe a foreigner who doesn't know what that means is when you can say something extremely funny, but have no emotion on your face when you're saying it.
Hmm.
Um, and it often makes it even funnier because you're saying
Hmm.
the most witty comment, but with this serious undertone. Especially given depending on what the situation is. And that's yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like because we do have deadpan humor in the States, but I feel like it's much less prevalent than it would. It sounds like it is in British culture because it's not like a go-to form of comedy. It's like, oh, this person specializes in deadpan humor, and I feel like you don't get those people if that's a regular sort of thing that people do.
Hmm. We are. I don't know. I think I, there's something to say about a person who can do deadpan humor exceedingly well. It's almost like this next level
Mm.
of comedy and humor and also intelligence. There's this real wit that goes with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the other thing. I do have a lot of confidence in Americans being witty. I'm sure there have been very, very witty Americans,
I'm
but
sure.
that's not something that I personally associate with American culture.
You want to be more sort of upfront and,
Right.
dare I say, like a little bit more sort of bombastic with your humor, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that tends to be the preference.
Um, so anyway, going back to the thing, I was shocked when I heard about the the sort of the
Yeah. Oh,
this
by the way,
entrenched bullying and the law and all that stuff. I found that very shocking.
yeah. Now that you're talking back to the topic, I'm remembering I wanted to clarify in case anyone wasn't sure. The metabo is like a shortened version of metabolic syndrome in Japanese.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes
So
sense.
that's where that comes from. So they're the metabolic syndrome regulations, right? Where it's like, okay, we don't want your waistline more than so large, right? It ties into the like. So when I worked in Japan, we would have to, and I think you're right that it only applies to like public employees. I think private offices can deal with that in other ways, and maybe exactly how they want. um, which might end up being very similar to the way that they deal with public institutions. But
Right.
yeah, but part of the requirement for my job as a public employee when I was teaching in Japan was I had to go get a health check every year, and this was before the whole like metabolic syndrome thing. This is just you're on national health care, national health care, and you're in the public profession. So you get this day off and you go to the health check. And if anything comes up at the health check, you then go with a clinic that specializes in that particular area. So we sort of already had the health check, and then the regulations that are specifically around metabolic syndrome are sort of more tailored towards strict enforcement, and they're more an issue for Japanese people. So that's something that I sort of got a little bit of a pass on. Although to be fair, I lost a lot of weight in Japan. When I first went there, I was classified as like they have. I don't fully know how this translates overseas, but under the Japanese classification system, I was rated as like overweight level 2. They had different levels, and
Okay.
they probably aren't measured in levels in the States. It's probably a slightly different system. But I was rated as overweight level 2, and over the course of my time in Japan, I started to learn how to cook. I specifically got one of the health checks. Actually, the system works. One of the health checks told like identified that I had high cholesterol and high blood pressure and all these other problems. I went to the doctor. He was like, "If you change your diet, you're young. I don't want to give you these medicines. If you change your diet, you can do something about it." Since I was just learning how to cook, I was like, okay, let's look up foods that are really good at lowering your bad cholesterol, because apparently there's also good cholesterol, and I had to learn all this stuff. So I implemented this diet to lower my cholesterol, and as I implemented it, like I ended up losing. I lost 35 kilograms, which is 70 pounds thereabouts, like 70 to 75, because it's not a straight multiply by 2. I don't even know how many stone because I don't use that measurement. But I
I'm
lost
just
a
about to,
ton of weight.
I'm just about to do the calculation. How many kilograms was it? 35, you said.
35, yeah.
Oof. That's
So
that's quite a lot, by the way.
quite a
Five and a half
lot.
stone. That's
Uh,
a lot of weight to lose.
so when I went into the health check for the next year, they were very concerned. They were like, "Have you been ill? Have
Oh my
you
goodness.
have you been eating?" Because they were not expecting that level of weight loss, right? I was just like, no, I'm just on this diet. I'm trying to lower my cholesterol. My cholesterol numbers got perfect. Uh, so the diet had its intended purpose and a little bit more. And but like everybody, and so that took me from overweight level 2 back down to like normal like regulation or whatever the regular expected Japanese body weight system is. Um, And so by the time, because like I said, the sort of overweight regulations that were coming into enforcement at around that time, I probably would have passed at that point anyway. But during the first part, when I first moved to Japan, I wouldn't have passed. And
Mm.
I was a foreigner. The system wasn't going to be that harsh to me. Maybe maybe my colleagues would have made some oblique comments. They didn't in my case, or if they did, I didn't catch them. But it sounds like Chris Broad didn't get off so easily.
No, there's a lot of chocolate flying around the staff room, and that is at his particular
Uh,
school,
uh, I see.
and everyone
Yeah,
was
that doesn't help.
partaking, I think,
Yeah,
but still.
yeah. Well, they try and make it so that everyone can have some. I like when I left. I went to all of my schools and I baked a cake for like every one
Oh,
of them, and so they like it up so that all the teachers in the staff room could have some of the cake. Yeah,
nice. Well,
that was
congratulations
good.
on the weight
It
loss.
didn't.
That's very impressive in 1 year.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've since gained a lot of it back. Not all of it, but it was was way high, went way down, and now is somewhere in the middle. So it's just how it goes.
Um, uh, where am I going with my? Okay, so the first note I wrote down uh, was to do again. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. I'm so sorry. Shinmoku, Chinmoku. If I type it, that
Okay.
might help. Do you know what this is, or maybe not?
Silence.
Yes, but prolonged silence. So Chris first experienced this when he had the
Mm-hmm.
meeting with the head teacher of the director of the school that he was going to teach
Oh,
in,
okay.
and he was there.
I know the usage he has in mind now. Go ahead.
So he was in this meeting, and they had a normal conversation about where he was from, experience, blah blah, oh, normal stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
then everyone just stopped talking,
Mm-hmm.
and he was just stuck there with the teacher who was helping sort of coordinate his entrance into the school and the director in just complete silence.
Mm-hmm.
And he was so freaked out about the entire thing. He thought he'd said something inappropriate or wrong. And then
Oh
suddenly,
man.
after this silence, the director just suddenly almost came back to life and went, right, see you around the school, Chris.
Yeah.
So can you fill in the viewers? Like, what is this all about?
So I don't know exactly what happened with Chris Broad's situation because in my experience, nobody just like goes into this moment of silence, uh, spontaneously without saying anything, right? Without a word of warning. So I mean, maybe it was because his Japanese wasn't great at the time, but usually someone will say, "Hi, Chinmok," right? They'll give that pronunciation, and then everyone will like bow their heads, and they have just this moment of silent reflection and it's just a regular thing. It's sort of like in American culture, it's like and now a moment of silence, right?
Mm,
And you're expected to sort of stand there and have this retrospective moment. And so it's a little bit more. It comes up more frequently in Japan, but it's a similar sort of thing in my experience. I'd be curious if Chris Broad's explanation's a little different though.
well, so I think they explained it that it was talking about this inner reflection and things, but the quote I wrote down that once they left the director's office, Chris was full of questions, saying what just happened in that room, and the way the quote I
Mm-hmm.
wrote down was the Japanese colleague who was helping him said, "It's best to leave some things unsaid," which sounds very
Ah,
ominous.
interesting. It does sound very ominous.
But I don't think he meant it in
That's
terms of like
weird.
you did stuff wrong. It was just in general. The way he was implying it is you don't have to say everything. Just reflect it. Reflect on it yourself. Don't verbalize it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Again, I think there's probably a slight differentiation in this circumstance because I'm used to hearing someone call for that, right? And so that
Mm,
much more strongly in my mind correlates to, and now a moment of silence, because again, someone's calling for it in that situation.
right.
So, yeah,
I
I
can't
think
remember
that's part of
now.
it.
I can't remember now if it was declared out up front.
Right.
I'm not sure.
Right.
I
It
mean,
sounds like it might not have been. Yeah.
it's possible. I can't. I don't want to say for certain because I can't remember. I just wrote it down. I found it just incredible. Um,
Yeah.
but again, if I had
Yeah.
the
If you're not
book, I
ready
would go
for
and look
that,
at. I look at the passage again. I mean, in the UK we do that. We say like a moment of silence, but that's normally only in remembrance of
right?
if there's
Yeah.
been a
But like I
tragedy
said,
or Remembrance Day or something. But
yeah, it tends to be employed a lot more in a wider group of settings in I was going to say in Japanese in Japan.
interest, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, looking at the time, because I know for me it's approaching 1 a.m. and for you it's approaching dinner time. So I think by the looks of it,
Right.
we might have to do part two of this.
Yeah,
How
it
much?
sounds like it. I don't know how long your list is. Maybe we can do one more.
Yeah. Where do we go? Well, okay. Oh, man, there's just so much stuff I want to do. Okay. Well, we'll talk a little bit about uh, Chris gets really involved. um, his especially the first couple of years on the program, his after school activities and
Mm.
weekends are mostly spent drinking and smoking.
Oh wow. Okay, he's very different than me.
So I was gonna say because we've talked about it before, but we can talk about it a bit more. But in terms of, he seemed to imply that in Japan there's a very strong smoking culture and a very strong drinking culture.
Both
So
of those things are true to my experience. I've heard that Japan is sort of moving away from smoking, but I sort of feel like I'll believe that when I see it. Next
okay,
time I go back to Japan, we'll see if anything's changed.
that's interesting because I looked up some statistics. Um,
Hmm.
that the rate, apparently, based on the website I found, that the rate of smoking in Japan is actually lower than Spain, which I could probably believe. There's quite a lot of smokers in Spain, which does annoy me. I'm not a huge fan of smoking, so sorry, if anybody listening
Mm-hmm.
who's a smoker, I do apologize, but I think also partly as an asthmatic, I just actually don't
Oh
like it.
yeah, that'll. Yeah.
Um, so it's around it's. I found different. Some are saying 15%, 19%, but in that ballpark sort of figure, sort of the higher
Okay.
teens. But 20 years ago, you're looking at 50%.
Yeah. I was gonna say 19% seems really low to me.
Okay, so they're saying that 20 odd years ago, 25 years ago, you're looking at almost half the population smoked.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I think probably when I went there, it was on the like transition down, right? Like I said, I've heard that the rates have declined. They probably I was there because again, I was there in 2008, which isn't 20 years ago, but it is 16.
Yep.
So,
Close enough.
um
Mm-hmm.
it was probably if I had to guess with no which I do, with because I have no actual formal study of this. But my estimate would put it at somewhere around 30% of people smoking.
Okay.
So, that feels like it's in line with 20 years ago it was 50%, these days it's about 20%, right? So 30% would be somewhere in the middle there, and that makes sense to me. That feels true to my experience in Japan. And even 30% of the population smoking, that's a lot of infrastructure. Because when I grew up in the States, smoking was declining in popularity, but it was still more of a thing. Like these days, there's no smoking sections in restaurants, but when I was
Mm-hmm.
growing up, there were.
Yep.
And so I remember growing up with smoking sections and then them getting phased out, and me as a non-smoker thinking, "Oh, this is amazing. I no longer have to put up with the fact that it's possible to have smoking and non-smoking sections because it's smoke, it gets everywhere."
Yeah.
And yeah, it can be worse in some places than others. That's true, but it will still sour my experience if I go into a place and it's got a smoking section. And then I went to Japan, and it was like, "Oh, it's like I've gone back in time because all these smoking sections are back."
I remember the same when Scotland was the first to, well, firstly as a kid going into a restaurant and them asking smoking or non-smoking.
Hmm.
And we'd always go into the non-smoking section, but I did have one of my parents did smoke at the time,
Okay.
so
Yep.
I was around. You know, we never never smoking while eating, but still, being sort of used to seeing people smoking and stuff. But I remember when the ban came in,
Hmm.
from indoor smoking. And I must admit, the more and more and more, the older I become, I've become way less tolerant to smoking, as it's becoming more and more limited in what situations you find
Hmm.
smokers. I've become less and less and less tolerant of smoking as a sort of as a habit. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed. I don't know because it says the statistic that I found, and again, this might be just be one source, so we can't say it's verbatim. This is spot on, but it's saying that the rate in
Sure.
Spain is twice that in the UK, which I find somewhat unbelievable. I'd probably, if I had to guess, I'd say that's more Spanish people smoke than British
Mm-hmm.
people. Um, maybe because the ban on smoking indoors, I think, came in later in Spain. But it's saying
Mm-hmm.
here that I always keep hearing from Americans that Americans often complain that every European smokes.
Mm.
Paraphrasing, obviously, but the rate in US is apparently higher than the UK. But I don't know if that's true or
Wow.
not. Um,
Yeah,
I, it,
I don't know
it,
anything about smoking rates.
it says, I mean, the website I found as of 2022 is 14% in the UK and 24% in the US.
I know it's been trending upwards. So there was a
Really?
period where smoking was trending down and down and down for a long time in the States. Helped in large part to a high profile court case where the smoking companies were found to have all colluded to put an addictive substance in their cigarettes, which it's now common knowledge, but at the time was a huge revelation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it just shot downwards in popularity for a long time. And as time has gone on, smoking rates have been going up in the states in the in the recent past. I don't know
Goodness.
because again, my general knowledge of what's going on in the states is fairly limited these days. I'm not as glued to the news as I used to be, although I'm looking to get back into that. Um, but I do remember reading, a few years back about how smoking was on the rise again, and just thinking, boy, this is terrible.
Yeah, because I think in most places of the world it's all trending downwards, right? As more, it's sort of there's more education on the subject, and then
Hmm.
the generation that really grew up with smoking being really prevalent, and now
Hmm.
the new generation are not exposed to it in quite the same way.
Right.
And it wasn't so socially acceptable to smoke, I
Hmm.
suppose, in that sense. Um, but I mean, when I was a teenager, I mean, obviously I didn't smoke personally, but I knew people from my school who smoked,
Hmm.
and I see, teenagers here who smoke, and yeah, I find it in this day and age with so much knowledge on the subject and stuff. I find it incredible that it's still a thing that happens. I mean, there's
Yeah.
the whole thing I saw actually recently. I can't remember if it was an article or if it was a YouTube video. I can't remember, but the whole thing about vaping was an
Hmm.
idea. The whole point of it was to get people off the tobacco
Yeah, that
cigarettes.
was the original. That was part of the original purpose. I've seen some skeptical takes on that, but I don't know how much stock to put in them.
Well, that's the thing they've discovered. It's actually had the reverse effect because
Yeah.
it's now encouraged a lot of people to get interested in vaping who would not have smoked in the first place, and it's then this like
Hmm.
gateway
Right,
into
because
proper
then they get
smoking or other
addicted.
stuff.
Yeah, they get addicted to the fact that there's still nicotine in the vape, and yeah,
Right.
that brings them into other sorts of smoking. Yeah, I've heard that. That's part of when I was talking about me like hearing that smoking was on the rise in the states. It's tied in with the increase of vaping.
Mm-hmm. I think the UK is the
So
same. The
I
thing
wonder
on
what's happening with that in Japan because again, like from my perspective, Japan has always been a more smoker friendly sort of country.
hmm,
So I wonder what sort of influence that vaping has had in that country. I don't know.
don't know. Something we have to research and come back to the next podcast, perhaps. Because it's a huge drop
Yeah,
off, right? If you're saying from 50%
yeah.
in
The
2001
benefit.
down to, say, high teens in 20 years later, that's a
Hmm.
huge drop off.
Yeah, that's
Um,
tremendous.
and you can't account for it from just generational shift either. That's a lot of people who are quitting.
Hmm.
Um, so, yeah, there's a
Yeah,
thing that's
especially with the Japanese population, the aging population of Japan. There's got to be a lot of people quitting.
right. So you can't just say, oh, it's all young people replacing. It's not. It's
Hmm.
clearly a lot of people quitting. And there's a thing now that's just been announced in the UK. I don't think it's passed law yet, but it's something they want to do. The new government in the UK want to make it so that anybody who's currently, I think it's under the age of 15,
Hmm.
will never be legally allowed to buy a cigarette in their life. So they want to have
Oh wow.
the first generation that is completely smoke free. Now, this was
Interesting.
they tried to do that in New Zealand, but
Mm-hmm.
if I remember rightly, and I have to research this and maybe put a comment in the notes below, the comments below, if I got this wrong. But I think what happened was in New Zealand, because there was then after that law was passed, or it was in process of getting passed, because the government changed, the new
Mm-hmm.
government repealed it, so it's not
I
the
see.
case anymore.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that makes sense to me.
I do wonder if that'll be the same thing in the UK if suddenly the government changes in basically 4.5 years' time, if it'll get
Mm-hmm.
reversed. Um, but
Yeah, I
I don't know.
wonder.
I'm very. I know the smoking company, the tobacco companies and stuff have a lot of they make a lot of revenue and tax tax revenue for the government, and they have a lot of power
They
and
do.
things. But I think
Yeah.
eventually we just have to. I mean, as somebody who detest smoking as an idea. I think it's a brilliant
Mm-hmm.
thing that they're trying to get rid of it, but it's going to be very hard, of course, to try and fight against that.
Yeah, I'm having a very sort of American culture-based reaction, which is instantly, the government is just banning smoking? How can they tell us what to do? That's my instantaneous reaction, which is why I know that it's pretty unlikely that that sort of law would be enacted in the U.S.
Yeah.
Uh, but I'm willing to entertain the prospect. I'm curious about how that would go if there was a country that was able to make that stick. And as a person, I feel like the evidence is pretty clear that smoking is nothing but bad for you, and it would be ideal if people didn't do it. I just sort of have that sort of American aspect of my thinking where I think, well, even if I think it's objectively a bad choice, is it my place to stop someone else from doing it if they want to?
Oh
I don't
man,
know.
it's a tricky one. Um, in theory, I don't know. This is tricky to now get into politics and stuff. I'd say in theory,
Yeah.
no. But the problem is if it's something like smoking, where immediately you hear about the effects of passive smoking and all this sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know if that
Yeah, it's a whole
person.
complicated thing that doesn't belong on the Keeping You Company
True,
podcast.
but
Yeah.
I just found it interesting. The fact it seemed to be this very prevalent thing, but the fact is also now looking at statistics, it's dropped off like a
Mm-hmm.
stone over the last two
Yeah.
decades, which I thought was very
Like I
impressive.
said, I've heard the same thing that you have about smoking rates in Japan, that it's declined. And
Mm.
like I said, my experience in Japan from that time ago, I was sort of like, yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. But it sounds like it really has dramatically dropped off. So I'm very curious to see what that's like when I go back to visit the country. Hopefully next year. I'm hoping to get a
Oh,
flight out there sometime next fall, but we'll see.
travel to Japan hype. Let's go.
I would
Nice.
love that, man. It's been too long.
Just last thing about smoking, when we were going through Germany on our summer trip, I
Mm-hmm.
found it shocking. It was something I'd forgotten about Germany. Was as we were walking through Hamburg Airport, uh, when we saw all the people at their gate waiting to board their plane or whatever, there were these little cubicles that people could go into just to smoke. Because they couldn't leave the
Oh
terminal
yeah.
building, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you were desperate for a smoke, there were these cubicles, and I was just looking in and thinking to myself, you poor. I mean, I was gonna say you poor people having to go in there to smoke, to because you got an addiction,
Right.
you need to get your fix. But you're having to
Mm-hmm.
stand. I mean, they must have been ventilated one way or the other, but these claustrophobic sort of cubicles with all the smoke of everybody else around you.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you're doing it in the open air either. Um,
Yeah.
I found it shocking as we're walking past, and I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, in the UK, that's not a thing at all. You have to wait to get
Yeah.
outside the terminal building. You always see people who cannot wait for that
Mm-hmm.
urge to get that fix of nicotine, and they're literally walking through the arrivals like section of the airport
Mm-hmm.
with the cigarette already in their mouth, ready to go
Mm-hmm.
at a second's notice.
Yep.
The minute they get outside, right, light up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yep.
off buses and things. Um, how about the last thing we talked about? How about the drinking culture, and obviously for you,
Yeah. Yeah.
how do
The
you deal with
drinking
that?
culture is a huge part of Japan, and I basically didn't deal with it. The closest I came was, and fortunately, this is more of a thing in the business world. It's still there, in the public sector, but it's not quite as prevalent. Like if you're a business person and you're working in Japan, like your business deals will get done at night when you're out partying and drinking with the people you want to do business with.
Right.
It's it's sort of all about going out and having a good time in a bar and reaching an agreement that you then formalize the next day with a suit and tie, right? It's
Hmm.
and it's famously terrible on Japanese families.
Oof.
It's been cited as one of the reasons the Japanese population is declining is because the guys have to stay out drinking all night and then go to work all day, right? So
Mm.
um, it's rough from my perspective, right? For I don't know how a Japanese person would look at it, and I know that I have another friend of mine who's a much more successful translator, and he's talked to me about how like, oh yeah, when you come to Japan, like you're gonna have to embrace the drinking side of things if you want to get anything done, and it's like I think that that's his perspective because he interfaces with clients directly. I tend to go through agencies, and so I'm unknown and get much less money, but I don't have to find clients. I don't have to go out drinking. Um, and in part, like one of the things he's told me was like, I thought I was drinking hard in college. There's a stereotype that in the U.S., uh, you go to college and then it's party time, right? Everybody's drinking all the time. And he was like, I thought I was partying in college. Then I went to Japan, and it was like, no, people really drink in Japan. And I remember just being like, wow, okay, this sounds like it's next level stuff. Again, like my approach was, okay, we have an official like office party that we're gonna go to, and this is like step one. So they call it in Japanese they call it like a ladder, where you go from like the official party to the after party to the after party, and like people
Hmm.
are dropping off in different stages as you go down each rung of, or up or down, I don't know which one it is, each rung of the ladder, and you end up with people who stay up till like 5, 6, 7 in the morning from the previous night because they just never stop going to the next party. And so what I would do is I would go to the first party. I wouldn't drink anything. There's usually a non-alcoholic option, especially at the first party. There's not much social pressure to be drinking all the time. You can if you want to, and then you can keep opting into more and more parties. Like the more parties you opt into, the more likely you are to be drinking the whole time anyway. So sort of a self-selecting process in part, I think. But I would just go. I drink the oolong tea. I'd make conversation for a couple hours, and then I'd go home. And that would be it. I'd make sure to go because if you don't go at all, you're even more of an outsider than if you just go to the first one and don't drink anything. So
And we talked about it.
I
Conformity is very important.
conformity is very important. If I didn't go at all, like I feel like I'd be shutting myself out in a way that would be rude, as opposed to going to the first one and not drinking anything. Yeah, I'm still putting myself apart. That's still me isolating myself in Japanese society. But I felt like at the time, and I could be wrong, this could be an instance where I was misreading the Japanese culture and being oblivious. Um, but I felt like I put myself in enough of a situation where I could be friendly with while still not going out and drinking and partying all night.
Hmm. So I guess that in that
So
sense you didn't have to worry about being the only sober person in a room, surrounded
yeah,
by.
not so much. Like it wouldn't get that bad at the first party. You could get people who drank a lot at the first party very quickly, so it's not like there were no drunks around, but it generally wasn't that bad at the first one.
Hmm. Because that's a thing as a teetotaler that I used to hate when I had to go out in
Mm-hmm.
certain situations. And everybody around me is getting progressively more drunk, and you're the only stone cold sober person in the room.
Mm-hmm.
That's that's a tough one.
Yeah.
um, okay, so it seems like yeah, you managed it in your own way in
Yep.
terms of just go be seen, and then once it moves on to the next run of the ladder, as you said, then it just you say it's not for you, and off you go.
Yep. I was like, all right, good night, everybody. Yeah, I'm going home.
But did you find you got from Japanese people, but also from uh, like other people on the JET program and stuff? Did you get a lot of backlash for being teetotal?
Again, it's not something I noticed. It might have been there. Um, and I might have shut myself out of certain opportunities. But I wasn't looking for those opportunities, so I didn't miss them, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was perfectly content to do my job at the school during the day and then go and study Japanese in my apartment and then go to bed, right? That was I was totally fine just living that life. And eventually I started walking everywhere, right? So get my exercise in. Uh, take on projects like learning to cook, right? So I was perfectly happy just doing that. And my whole goal was like level up my Japanese to the point where I feel like I can become a translator by the time I leave the JET program. And after the diversion of walking the length and width of Japan, that's basically what I did. And it was through a contact on the JET program that I first got started. One of the other people who was working in my office left at the same time as me, ended up going to a translation company, um, and became a project manager there. And so when I started looking for job opportunities, she was like, "Hey, I work at a translation place, and we've got work for you. Are you okay with Otome games?" And I was like, "I'm okay with anything. I want my foot in the door." And so started working.
Especially when you've gone there with that very clear intention in
Mm-hmm.
mind, then that certainly would help in terms of staying focused and not necessarily feel like you're missing out on anything. Whereas it doesn't matter. I mean, maybe this might be in Chris's case, but it could be anybody, right? If you're going with maybe not exactly a clear plan, um, then yeah, outside of your work commitment, you might have to find things to fill in the gaps in
Mm-hmm.
your day, and that's when um, let's call it excessive socializing. Let's say
Yeah.
might become thing. Socializing is really key, obviously.
Yeah. And
With
it's not necessarily excessive in Japanese society. Like I was saying, like it's just the way that business happens. Like
right,
again, I think I lucked out in part that I was in the school system as opposed to the business system because that's just the way that deals are done, right? Japanese society is built off of that party culture. I just not really quite right to call it a party, I don't think, but I'll just say it for lack of a better word.
right. I feel yeah, and maybe going also there when you're a little bit older also helps.
Mm.
Maybe there's not the same
Hmm.
pressure. You might feel more comfortable in your own skin in terms of being like, yeah, I'm a teetotaler. Deal with it.
Hmm. Yeah.
I'm happy.
Yeah. Well, you get similar things, not quite to the extent in terms of like shutting you out of business opportunities, but sort of tying back to not doing differently well and placing orders at restaurants and things like that. The people who would have a really hard time when they came to Japan across the board, vegetarians,
Oh,
because
okay.
they decided they didn't want to eat or consume anything that was related to like animal products. Um, and one of the things that you run into very quickly in Japan is everything is somehow related to fish.
Right.
And
Okay.
they will be like, "Oh, you're vegetarian. So what sort of fish do you want because you can't eat meat?"
Oh no. Right.
And then they're like, "Well, didn't I just tell you I don't eat like animal products?" And they're like, "Yeah, but fish are okay, right?" Because when you say meat to a Japanese person, right? Niku, this is sort of something like sort of wrapped up in translation, right? The concept of
uh,
meat in English and the concept of niku in Japan don't match 100%. Niku is like land-based animal meat, sakana or
okay.
what have you, right? Like things that are related to like seafood is its own separate sort of category. So all these like things that like miso soup you might want to order. Well, it's all based off of a bonito fish stock, right? So animal products right there, miso soup. Even though just like after you account for the broth, right? If they had made it with water instead of this broth, it would just be like tofu and some mushrooms and something else, right? Like nothing that they've put into the soup is necessarily going to violate a vegetarian's code. But the fish stock,
Oh yeah.
that
Totally.
checks the box for a lot of vegetarians. It's like, okay, well, I can't have miso soup. I can't have this, that, or the other. They have to very carefully find ways around the ways that Japanese people use seafood.
Oof.
And uh, again, Japanese isn't very accommodating, or Japan isn't very accommodating to people with these different, like wildly different culinary restrictions. So they don't have vegetarian options, or the vegetarian options will have fish on them. And it's just a situation where everybody I knew who was vegetarian who went when they went to Japan, they had a hard time.
Oof. Yeah.
It's like taking their own food everywhere. um, interrogating like official options very closely to make sure that it actually was in line with their preferences, right? Like if you any sort of
Mm,
restriction like that, they had to be very mindful of and deliberately stick to. So it's much easier for me to ignore alcohol than it was for them to ignore any sort of meat or fish or what have you.
yeah, I get it. When you say it like that, it's a lot more restrictive.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I think things also too, like we talked about in previous podcasts and things, that food and drink in general is a social thing. You eat
Hmm.
together, you drink together,
Yep. Yep.
and bonds are formed between each other, but also because of the food that you're consuming together. If it's
Hmm.
home cooked or if you go to a restaurant and enjoy something. So yeah, I can imagine definitely how restricted that could be if you can't go out to eat. That
Hmm.
if there's a lot of limitations in terms of what you can eat, that must cause a
Hmm.
lot of issues.
Yeah.
I've
One of my
noticed.
favorite
Go on.
linguistic things in English, just to solidify your point here, is the word companion, right? Literally, kon pan, right, is the
Mm-hmm.
origins. It's like
Right.
with bread, right? It's the people you sit down to have a meal with. I love that.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've noticed here that the Spain is in general, again, I'm trying to generalize, a lot less accommodating to vegetarians and vegans than the UK.
Mm.
Um, it's getting better. I think it also depends on where you go. If you go to somewhere like Barcelona, which is a very big city with lots of different types of people, right, and also a lot of tourists as well, then yes, it'll be more accommodating. But the town I'm in, I can maybe only think of maybe two vegetarian restaurants I can think off the top of my head in terms of dedicated restaurants. And there's been
Mm.
times for me when I've gone into just a normal restaurant, and when I look at the set menu that they have for lunch, if you look at the second course,
Hmm.
everything is meat or fish based, mostly meat,
Wow.
because Spain is quite a heavy sort of meat eating country. If you go to places like
Hmm.
Galicia, then there's a lot of seafood at the North Atlantic coast. Mediterranean, there is some stuff, of course, as well. Um, there's a lot of it's meat based, and there are a lot of times where I'm just sitting there going, I don't want to eat meat today. I
Hmm.
want to eat
Hmm.
something, and you can order two starters, and they can maybe make the portions a bit bigger or something. Um,
Hmm.
but I sit there and go, oh, I feel sorry for vegetarians sometimes when I'm sitting there going, because I'm not a hard and fast vegetarian. I probably talked about it before. I try to reduce my meat consumption, and when I do eat meat, I want
Hmm.
to enjoy it or have
Hmm.
a small like today I cooked a stew where I had a couple of chili for sausages thrown in, but that's going to
Hmm.
be my meal for the next 2 3 days. So I'm spreading it out. Um, but if you're a really hard and fast vegetarian,
Hmm.
oof, it must be a struggle sometimes.
Oh
It's
yeah, it's
very
gotta be.
tricky. Yeah, things are changing, especially now with
Hmm.
the internet stuff. There's a lot more vegan and vegetarian cooking online and things. But yeah, I agree.
Hmm.
When you go out to socialize, not drinking can be tough, but you can navigate around that. But not being able to
Hmm.
eat or being very limited on what you can eat,
Yeah.
it's tricky.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. And like I think I've said before, like I perfectly understand the stance of wanting to be a vegetarian given the way that meat is produced.
Mm.
Uh, I think that's completely valid, and I have a lot of admiration for the people who can stick to it. And it's just crazy that it's as hard as it is.
Yeah, especially nowadays, right?
I
If it all trend in the right direction.
Yeah, my own position is similar to yours at the moment. I've thought about going vegetarian. I haven't actually done it, but I sort of try to minimize meat consumption.
Mhm. Um, yeah, I hate to say it, but meat tastes good. But I feel in
It does.
moderation. I feel if you,
It does.
at least with
Well,
me anyway. I know there's some people who
this
have to have it every day. Um,
yeah, this could be a whole podcast in its own right. Like,
yeah.
but I feel, but yeah, I do feel like as much as I appreciate the ethical standpoint of people who don't want to do any harm to animals, I also feel like it's like animals kill each other, right?
Mm, yeah.
that's that's a reductive argument, and the way that we do it is nothing like what happens in the
In the
wild.
wild, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's I still think there's a huge, and like I said, I respect the other argument. I think there's a lot of nuance here, and again, we could do a full episode on this if we really wanted to be. I don't know how divisive this topic would be, but if we really wanted to get into it, we could probably do a full episode just on what's going on with meat production and the ethics of consuming it. But boy, that would be a homework heavy episode.
Ah, yeah. I have to do a bit of reading on that, but yeah, and
Yeah, but I took a whole class in college about animal ethics and the philosophy behind not just vegetarianism, but what it means to ethically consume animals.
right.
And there's a whole range of different positions, and they've all got their own sort of different moral bases that are more or less philosophically grounded. And it was just a fascinating experience. So I can totally see lots of different sides to this argument.
hmm The issue
Boy,
I've
we took quite a turn. Go ahead. Sorry.
we did take a turn, but I feel, yeah, I think the issue with something, and again, maybe it's the same with the smoking topic, right? You said, can you tell people what to do with their own body? Well, probably not, right?
Hmm.
um, and I think also too, I'm going to tell an incident I'm going to tell you an incident that happened in Edinburgh, which kind of riled me up against the vegetarian and vegan. And I got to be honest and say again that this person does not reflect the whole vegan and vegetarian community.
Hmm.
um, but I think it's also when you see somebody, this is very true, like if it's smoking or drinking or something slightly different, like eating meat or something, you you see that you see them in that isolated situation, but you don't know what their day to day habit or routine is with that thing, whatever it is we're discussing. So the case that I had was my wife and I were in Edinburgh. We're walking back to my student flat at the time, and we'd gone to the supermarket. So we're carrying all our various things, right? And just because we didn't want the bag to break or whatever, because there's something maybe a difference between Britain and America. You like
Hmm.
paper bags from the supermarkets, or maybe that's an
Well,
older thing.
they're all there. That's changing.
Oh,
I've got my own sort of recycled nylon bag that I like to use.
okay. Okay, so yeah, so it's the same in the UK when well, in the at least in the recent past, the most common thing to get from the supermarket would be a disposable plastic bag. The whole idea of having
Hmm.
paper bags. It's something now, again, watching Desperate Housewives, all these housewives are walking around with these paper bags full of groceries, which is not a thing you see in the UK. It was always plastic bags. But now, because
Yeah.
the,
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say, like me growing up, it was also always plastic bags. It's
uh,
relatively recently. I don't know about Desperate Housewives. I don't know how long it's been running. It might be regional.
mid 2000s.
Okay, so it might be a regional thing, or I might just be old and losing track of time. Both possible. But when I was growing up, plastic bags were everywhere. It was plastic for everything, and
Interesting.
they used to ask you like paper or plastic because both were on hand, and plastic was like the default. And
Ah,
at some point, we started passing a lot of laws that said, okay, well, plastic, we're going to phase that out because it's bad for the environment.
yeah.
So we started phasing that out, and now it's you have to bring your own bag, or we'll provide paper for you.
Interesting.
So
Okay, so
I provide my own bag. Sounds like a lot of people use paper.
right, interesting. Okay, well, in the UK, it's very much a case of bring your own bag, or the supermarket will potentially give you a bag. Might have to buy a permanent one, or if they do give you a disposable one, you have to pay on top of your bill for it, of your shopping for it. Anyway, so we were I can't remember if we had our own shopping bags, or maybe we did, or maybe they were too full, or something. Whatever happened, whatever the case was, or maybe my wife was holding a bottle of normal dairy milk. Cue this guy on a bicycle coming towards us, um, as we were just approaching my flat at the entrance from the street. This guy comes up to us on his bike, jumps off his bicycle, and
Hmm.
gives us like a death stare as he was going past us
Hmm.
after hopping off the bike, and just says, "You're not a baby cow." Now, cue us being incredulous and thinking, what the actual F was that? And you meet some weird people
Yeah.
in Scotland. So I don't know what the hell he was on about. And it took me a while to twig what he was referring to. It was only when we were packing the shopping and I had to put the bottle down. I was like, ah. Um, so he was clearly protesting. about,
Wow. Yeah.
um, now, the thing is, again, I can say this with hindsight. To take the moral high ground slightly, fine. We can, if we want to argue about the ethics of drinking dairy milk, that's fine. I know
Hmm.
a lot of the argument. I appreciate there'll be people who don't like it or don't agree
Hmm.
with it. Perfectly understandable. Um, at that moment in my life, I was completely on board with it, and I was actually mostly drinking soy milk at that time.
Hmm.
Um, if the guy had actually looked in one of our shopping bags, he would have also found soy milk.
Hmm.
We were going, I was going like a 50-50 approach at that point. So I'm not going to
Okay.
phase out completely, but we'll have this half a half sort of situation. Um, so yeah, and you see something like that in just pure isolation without actually thinking about, well, what's your normal routine? And say when
Hmm.
people like eat meat and then people complain, say, oh, you shouldn't be eating meat. Yeah, but maybe I haven't eaten meat all month and I might just want to have a really nice steak and enjoy it. You know what I
Right.
mean? And then yeah, and then it, as soon as we start talking about smoking and stuff, that's as much as I talked earlier about my intolerance to smoking. It's not
Hmm.
intolerance to smokers, um,
Right.
especially growing up
Yeah, I
with
think
both
I
parents
think
who.
that's
Well, sorry, I'm gonna go.
go ahead.
I was gonna say that one of my parents was at least at that time during my childhood still an active smoker, and my
Hmm.
other parent had been had stopped smoking way before I was born, but was essentially,
Hmm.
from what I gather, was more or less a chain smoker during their youth. Just because at
Okay.
that point it was so prevalent, you could smoke in offices and all this sort of stuff, right?
Hmm.
Um, so and I know it's an addiction, like so many things.
Yeah.
Also, then you get into alcohol and then food's complicated as well, right? So
Hmm.
and my intolerance is not to smokers. I just don't
Yeah.
like the
Oh, I feel
action
the
of
same way.
smoking, right?
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction to make. Like my brother's a smoker, so I'm friends with a guy who smokes not regularly, but like very occasionally. Um, so it's like I don't have anything against the people who do it. I don't have anything against the people who eat meat, right? Like I'm talking about my admiration for people who like go full vegetarian, but I'm not out there with a pitchfork for going after people who are buying milk, right? Or
Right. But if you
yelling yelling at people at the grocery store. But
right.
yeah, I again like I do understand the ethics of factory farming are it's pretty dire, man. It's pretty dire.
Mm. But just when you get somebody protesting against you who doesn't know you, that person
Yeah.
who was on the bike, maybe he thought he was being clever and be like, oh, I'm gonna plant the seed that changes their mind.
Hmm.
But you don't have to be so somewhat smug about it. You don't know
Right.
me. If you're my best friend
Hmm.
or something, and we're having a conversation, and if I say
Yeah.
something that you openly disagree with, and I said, "Oh no, there's nothing ethically wrong with eating meat," that's not my opinion I have. But
Hmm.
imagine I just threw that out there. If
Sure.
if I'm talking to you, for example, as a friend, you have the right to counter that argument,
Hmm.
and we can go off on one and until we're blue in the
Right.
face, about why we're wrong or right about certain topics. But would you go
Hmm.
up to a stranger who's just
Total
walking along the
stranger.
street?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I wouldn't. I
I
wouldn't
don't
do that.
know.
Some
It's a
people
tricky
would.
one, but where do you
Yeah.
draw the line? The thing I hate about smokers, maybe not the action of smoking, but when they drop the cigarette butt on the ground
Hmm.
in terms of form of littering. And it's like,
Right.
you're not the only one walking on this pavement.
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
but I don't know. It's tricky, right? Um, and that's maybe a case
Yeah.
of we talked about it earlier, right? This collective society versus more individualistic one. Um,
Hmm.
that maybe in the West, quote unquote, I hate that word, but I'm going to use it. We're maybe
Hmm.
shifting a little bit more one way than the other. Again, it's generalization, right? We feel like this podcast should
Yeah.
just be called the Generalization Podcast. That's what we seem to be doing.
Yeah, maybe, maybe. Every now and then we can draw on specific examples, but there inevitably are a bunch of generalizations that get thrown around as well. It's tricky. It's tough to balance,
Hmm,
but it's all this talk of food has me getting pretty hungry, and I know it's got to be late for you.
yeah.
So,
I was just gonna end on a very quick note just to say like the whole sort of teetotal thing. Um,
mhm,
it was interesting to hear that you're able to adapt it, adapt to your Japanese experience, and didn't, come across a huge amount of conflict with it. Since I've come to Spain, I've talked about before in previous podcasts how I feel Spanish people in general have a much healthier
mm,
attitude to alcohol
mhm,
than the British do. Again, stereotyping, but in general, it's very different. I think it also helps the fact that my wife is not a heavy drinker, so that
mhm,
helps. I don't think I think I'd probably find it hard to be in a relationship with somebody who's a very heavy drinker,
mm,
even if it's just for social purposes, not to get blinding drunk. Just to be clear.
mhm,
Um, so we operate on a very similar sort of, you know, very similar way of when we go out and socialize with each other, but also with other people. That she can have
mhm,
a couple of drinks or whatever, but I know it's not going to be ridiculous and turn to excess or whatever. And even like I feel like sometimes I'm trying to encourage her to have alcohol when we go out on a nice romantic date or something. I'll be like, you can have a
mhm,
glass of wine, and she's like, no, it's fine, I'll just have water.
mhm.
So I feel like I'm the one trying to encourage her to have wine, but she has been having
Yeah.
some wine and stuff. Um, I found it was more of an issue in high school and university. Um,
Mm,
in high school, because we talked about before that the drinking age is lower in the
mhm,
UK than in the States, and also then the minute it starts becoming about, well, if the parents are buying the alcohol, not the kids, they can drink even younger. So any sort of school parties where there's alcohol
mhm,
involved or whatever, no, I wouldn't go because it's like, well,
mhm,
it's not for me. And then at university, I didn't really socialize much in my undergraduate days because most of the socializing that was taking place was around alcohol.
mhm,
And the last thing, and I'd hear my best friend come back home and explain everything that happened that night, and I just think that sounds awful.
mhm,
um, in particular, uh, one of my best friend who I lived with, um, wanted to sort of try to give up the drinking and wanted to do something more productive with his free time, which resulted in him joining the local rugby club.
Oh
And
wow.
anybody who knows anything about rugby players, they drink a lot. So yeah, um, cue me walking back randomly home one night, late at night after doing some studying and watching a football game in a pub, but I was eating, not drinking. And I suddenly get this random phone call from someone I don't know, and I answer it saying, "Hello, are you the flatmate of blah blah blah?" My friend's name, and I
Mhm,
said, "Yes," and they was like, "Oh well, he's he played a rugby match, and he's had quite a lot to drink. He's now passed out. We sent him home in a taxi."
oh wow.
This was quite a regular occurrence, and the number of times that he would come home late, I'd hear him stumbling in. Goodness knows what hour.
Mhm,
um, and the funny stories. Oh man, if he ever gets married,
mhm.
I've got the best man speech already written in my head. It was
Nice.
nothing extremely embarrassing, but still. So that's
Yeah.
the thing. Like I became a lot more socially reclusive because a lot
Mm,
of the socializing was done around alcohol, which I
yeah.
didn't face a huge amount of backlash, but I also just didn't
Mhm,
want people constantly questioning me. Why are you drinking?
mhm.
Um, but then
Yeah.
as I got
I'm
older and socializing was around other things like board games,
yeah.
then that's different. Then that's how then
Yeah.
it became a different thing.
Yeah. I'm naturally fairly reclusive, so I never had much of a social life.
Oh, I mean, I
Yeah.
mean, if you ask me introvert, extrovert, introvert all the way.
Oh yeah. Oh, same here. No
Well,
no question.
no, easy peasy answer. Um,
Mhm.
which is I don't know how then as a teacher that works. Students often
Oh man. I
used to
the thing
question that.
about the thing about me, I don't know how this is for you, but when I would go into the classroom, it was like I was on a stage,
Yes.
and performing is way easier than actually trying to socialize for me.
Hmm.
So I was in a show choir when I was in high school. That was no problem for me. So
Interesting.
I didn't socialize with anyone in that that choir really. Like two of my best friends were in there, but they were the only people I even really talked to. So
Hmm.
uh like yeah, it's just I'm very introverted, but when it comes to putting on a performance, oh, I can make that happen, right?
Oh yeah.
So teaching was sort of a similar sort of thing for me, where it was like, yeah, I can go in front of this classroom and I can put on a show that is me doing the class, right? And
Right.
be engaging and fun and talk to people. Like it's like I've got a script. When I'm
Mm-hmm.
socializing, I don't have a script, and
Oh man.
that makes me nervous.
Oh, spontaneous. Oh man. Yeah, you're speaking my language. I was exactly the same. I used to explain to my students that I can talk to everybody in the class because it's my job. You're here to listen
Hmm.
to me. I'm there to talk to you. So it's
Hmm.
not so much. I do understand the whole performance thing because I completely agree with that. Depending on the class, you might need to perform more than others, but
Yeah.
there's like this understanding of right. I'm talking to you because it's my job. You're gonna listen to me and talk to me back because you're here to learn, and we'll have this really engaging, hopefully,
Hmm.
class and interact, dynamic class and whatever. But yeah, I said to them, the minute I go out of my workspace, I snap back into my introverted. Like, and if you just see me walking the street, I'll have headphones on because I want to be
Hmm.
inside my own little space. If I see you, I'll wave and say hi, but I will not engage. It depending on who the person is, obviously, but some people I will stop and talk to for a longer time. It just depends on the person. But I snap back into my own little introverted bubble. So introverted and
Hmm.
shy are not the same thing. But I'm still shy
Hmm.
too, especially a spontaneous conversation. Oh my god, if I have to introduce
Yeah.
myself randomly, oh no, I hate
Yeah,
it.
I feel the
And
same way.
it's bad at the moment because I'm changing jobs a little bit, and that means I'm trying
Oh
to
yeah. You got to
make
introduce yourself to a lot
contacts.
of people. Yeah.
Oh man, I mean, I went to a conference a couple of months ago, and it was very productive. And I was like, see, if you talk to people, they will help you, and you have good contacts, and it's fine. But oh my god, it's so stressful.
Yeah.
It exhausts me. Anyway, so yeah, it looks like we're gonna have to do a part two or even a part three of this.
Absolutely.
But I kind
Yeah.
of
The
knew this was
last
gonna
like half
happen.
hour, wasn't even on the topic. This is what we just start going on these tangents. It's so fascinating just to talk to you.
Yeah,
I
likewise.
I'm curious, viewers, what do you think about some of the topics? Because we wandered, and again, we're still exploring the limits of what is and isn't good for keeping you company podcasts. What did you
That's
think
true.
about some of the detours into animal ethics
Yeah.
and teetotaling and all that stuff? I'd be curious if you have any thoughts to share in terms of whether you're interested, whether you think it's appropriate or not, any sort of thing like that. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts about as a listener.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think a lot of the topics we've done, we've just naturally end up straying into these sort of more controversial, more sort of political topics, and eventually one of us had to go, right, I will just rein this back in.
Yeah.
Let's not go there.
Yep. Indeed.
So yeah, I think based upon the list I've got, maybe we're about halfway through. But then again, it's very possible that I say we're halfway through, but then there might be some things I'll be like, ah, you know what, I don't want to talk about that. But maybe the
Hmm.
conversation just led itself, or it's not really, maybe now not very interesting. But then other things we might get stuck on, or we might whiz through it really quickly. I have no idea.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the thing about those lists, right? But I think if we got one episode out of this and we stayed on topic for maybe half the time, and we
that's
got what 2.5 hours, that's pretty good.
that's
I
pretty
think
good
we can
going
get
for
another
us.
one. Yeah, that's pretty good for us. I agree.
So yeah, yeah, people feel free to leave comments below on anything you found interesting, if there's something you particularly want to discuss more. Um,
Hmm.
Depending on how we record, just depending on timing, we might record the next podcast before this one comes out. It just depends on how things fall. But if we see comments, we always will see them and we will respond to them either by replying directly, but then in the next podcast that we record after seeing the comment, we will bring it up. Um, so it might not be immediately in the next episode, but potentially the episode after. We will discuss anything. So feel free
Hmm.
to leave any comments below. And yeah, any closing thoughts?
No, just again, encourage you to leave feedback as to what you'd like this show to be, and it can be topics, it can be feedback specifically on what we've done, anything like that. And yeah, as always, thank you. If anyone's made it this far, still listening, still awake, we appreciate you. We're here to keep you company, and we're glad you're here.
Absolutely. Seconded. Well, thank you, Rick. Very interesting chat as always. I'll keep my notes for the next time. And
Hmm.
if we end up getting through that topic quicker, then we got a myriad of things to
Yeah,
to
there's no
transition
shortage
into.
of stuff for us to talk about.
Oh no. um, so anyway, yeah, thank you everybody for listening or watching. Hope you enjoyed the trains going round on a continuous loop. And a couple of, I noticed during the recording there was some hands of other people getting caught in the footage. I thought I'd clip them out, but obviously I hadn't. So enjoy the random hands that were pointing at the trains. Thank you for watching,
I'm
everybody.
excited to watch this.
I can't wait to see the detail and the different
It's gonna be nice.
landscapes of the different regions.
It's
It'll be
gonna
so
be
cool.
it's gonna be great.
So yeah, see you soon, Rook. We'll chat very soon, I hope. And everybody who is listening, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And we'll see you in another video very soon. Take care, everybody.
Bye.